You're going back out there. The teacher grabbed Ethan's arm, her voice cracking. Are you insane? You'll die out there. She's probably already. Don't. Ethan pulled free. Don't finish that sentence. He zipped his coat and walked toward the door. Nobody tried to stop him again. If you've ever watched someone do something brave when everyone else stood still, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The morning Ethan Walker climbed onto that school bus, he already knew how the next 3 days were going to go. He could feel it the same way he felt bad weather coming in off the ridge. That low pressure in the chest, that quiet before something turns ugly. He'd spent his entire life being the wrong kind of person in the wrong kind of room, and a luxury charter bus full of private school students wasn't going to be any different. He was 20 years old. He was wearing a canvas work jacket that had belonged to his father before the accident, boots with a crack along the left sole he'd been meaning to repair for 2 months, and jeans that had seen more hay bales and engine grease than any classroom. The bus smelled like expensive cologne and new luggage. Ethan smelled like the farm. He found a seat near the front, away from the noise, and looked straight ahead. The temporary job had come through a community center contact 3 days accompanying a private school winter trip into the Blue Ridge Mountains as an additional adult supervisor. The regular chaperone had broken his wrist the week before. Someone needed the position filled fast. Ethan needed the money fast. It was that simple. $42 a day plus meals. His family's water pump had given out 6 days earlier. They were hauling water from the neighbor's well in 5-gallon buckets every morning. $42 a day felt like the difference between surviving and not. He didn't tell the school that part. He just showed up on time, shook hands with the 2 teachers, and kept his mouth shut. The students filtered on in waves, loud, confident, moving through the world, the way people move when they've never been told they didn't belong somewhere. They passed Ethan without looking at him. Not rudely exactly, just the way you don't look at furniture. He heard his name once from somewhere in the middle of the bus. That's the farm guy they hired. My mom said he literally shovels manure for a living. Laughter, brief, casual, already moving on to something else. Ethan kept his eyes forward. He was used to it. What he was not used to, what made him glance back just once, was the girl who boarded last. She came on alone. No cluster of friends waiting for her. No one saving a seat, no performance of arrival. She was 17, blonde hair pulled back in a simple knot, wearing a plain dark jacket that was noticeably less expensive than everything around her. She moved down the aisle with her chin slightly down, not looking at anyone the way someone walks when they've learned that making eye contact in a room like this only invites trouble. She chose a seat 3 rows behind Ethan on the opposite side. Window seat. She put her bag on her lap instead of the overhead rack, like she was ready to leave at any moment. Something about that posture hit Ethan somewhere familiar. He turned back around. He didn't know her name yet. He would find out soon enough, the way you find out everything in a confined space, through whispers and the particular silence that falls when certain names get said out loud. Lily Grayson. The name traveled from the back of the bus to the front within the first 20 minutes of the drive, and it traveled the way rumors travel, fast sideways and with just enough venom to make sure it stuck. She's literally sitting right there. I know it's so weird that they let her come. Her dad is like actually Hell's Angels, like not joking. My dad said he has a record. My mom said she's surprised they even let someone like her enroll. Ethan heard all of it. He heard it the way you hear weather coming, not because you're listening for it, but because it fills the air whether you want it to or not. He didn't turn around again. But he thought about the girl with the bag on her lap and the chin slightly down, and he thought about what it cost a person to sit in a room where everyone was quietly deciding they didn't belong there. He knew that cost. He'd been paying it his whole life. The Walker farm sat on 43 acres of rocky Virginia hillside that his grandfather had turned into something productive through sheer stubbornness and backbreaking work. His father, Daniel Walker, had inherited that stubbornness and built on it, added a small greenhouse operation, repaired the old barn into something that actually stood straight, ran a modest but respectable cattle operation that kept them above water most years. Then the tractor accident happened. Ethan had been 18. He'd watched the whole thing from 30 feet away, and he would never fully stop seeing it, the way the machine rolled on the slope, the sound it made, his father's voice cutting off mid-sentence. Daniel Walker survived. But the damage to his lower back and left hip meant he would never work a full day the way he used to. Some mornings he couldn't get out of bed without help. Ethan had finished his junior year of high school and quietly decided that college wasn't something that was going to happen. Not right away, maybe not ever. His mother, Carol, had picked up extra shifts at the hardware store in town. His older sister had sent money from Raleigh when she could, which wasn't often because she had her own family to hold together. And Ethan had become the farm. Not inherited it, become it. He learned everything his father couldn't do anymore. He learned it from YouTube videos at midnight, after 12-hour days from neighbors who took pity and showed him things once and expected him to remember from trial and error that sometimes cost them money they didn't have. He fixed equipment with salvaged parts. He renegotiated the supply contracts his father had always handled. He drove to the bank himself at 19 and sat across from a man in a tie and made the case for why the Walker farm deserved another 6 months on the payment schedule. He got the 6 months. He went home and sat in his truck in the driveway for a long time before going inside. His parents never fully understood how close it got sometimes. He didn't tell them. There was no point in making them carry something they couldn't do anything about. So when the community center called with the chaperone job, Ethan didn't hesitate. He arranged coverage for the farm. His neighbor Roy, who was retired and never seemed to mind, would check on his parents and the animals twice a day. He packed his one decent bag, the canvas work jacket, and the boots with the cracked sole. 3 days, $42 a day. He could make it work. What he hadn't counted on was the weather. The forecast when they departed had called for light flurries, seasonal, nothing unusual for the Blue Ridge in December. The trip was a long-standing tradition at the school, an outdoor education experience they called it, though Ethan thought a more honest name might have been a chance for rich kids to feel like they've roughed it. 4 days at a mountain lodge, some guided hikes, team building activities, the kind of structured adventure that came with emergency contacts and liability waivers and hot meals waiting at the end of it. Ethan had read the trip folder twice on the bus. He was thorough like that. His father had always said the most dangerous thing in any situation was assuming someone else had already thought of the important things. He noted the location of the ranger station 6 miles up the mountain from the lodge. He noted the emergency supply locations. He noted that the backup communication equipment was kept in a locked box in the bus's rear storage compartment. He noted all of this because he was the kind of person who noticed things. Nobody noticed him noticing. The first day passed without incident. The lodge was exactly what Ethan expected. Exposed beam ceilings, a massive stone fireplace, wall-mounted animal heads that were probably supposed to feel rustic and just felt sad. The students claimed their rooms organized their social hierarchies with the efficiency of people who'd been doing it since kindergarten and largely ignored Ethan unless they needed something. He was fine with that. He ate dinner at the end of the staff table. He helped the teachers organize the next day's hiking assignments. He checked in with Roy by text parents, fine animals fine, stopped worrying, and turned out his light at 10:30. He saw Lily Grayson at breakfast the next morning. She was sitting alone at a table near the window eating oatmeal and looking out at the mountain. Around her, the dining room buzzed with the particular energy of teenagers freed from routine, loud, and performative and completely indifferent to anything outside their own orbit. Ethan got his coffee and almost kept walking. Instead, he stopped. "Mind if I sit here?" She looked up. Something shifted in her face, surprise first, then the careful flatness that follows it when you're not sure if kindness is real or a setup. "It's a free table," she said. He sat. He didn't try to make conversation right away. He drank his coffee and looked out the window at the same mountain she'd been looking at. After a moment, she said, "You're the fill-in chaperone." "Yeah." "You're younger than I expected." "Yeah." She went back to her oatmeal. He went back to his coffee. It should have been awkward. It wasn't particularly. Sometimes silence between two people who are used to being alone in a crowd doesn't feel like silence at all. It just feels like company. "I'm Ethan," he said eventually. She looked at him again, that careful flatness again measuring. "I know who you are." How the corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile. Word travels. He almost asked what word exactly. Then he figured he already knew. "I'm Lily," she said. "I know who you are too," he said. She went very still. He kept his voice easy, casual. "You sat 3 rows behind me on the bus, window seat, bag on your lap the whole way." She relaxed. just slightly. I like to be ready. Ready for what? She looked back out the window. Whatever. He understood that. He understood it completely. He nodded once and drank his coffee, and they sat together in the comfortable quiet of two people who had both learned that being ready for whatever was just how you got through a day. That was the last quiet morning any of them would have for a long time. By midday, the sky had changed. Ethan noticed it on the afternoon hike, the particular quality of the light, the way the wind had shifted from the northwest and was picking up moisture, the temperature dropping faster than the forecast had suggested. He mentioned it to the lead teacher, Mrs. Calloway, a woman in her 50s who had been running this trip for 11 years and had no particular interest in weather analysis from a 20-year-old fill-in chaperone. The forecast said flurries, she said. Yes, ma'am, but the wind has shifted. I grew up on a farm in these mountains. When the wind comes out of the northwest like that and drops 20 degrees in 2 hours, it usually means, I appreciate your concern, Ethan. Her tone was patient, the way a teacher's tone gets patient right before it runs out of patience. We'll head back to the lodge at 3 o'clock as scheduled. He let it go. He shouldn't have let it go. By 2:15, the flurries had become something entirely different. It came down fast. The kind of snow that doesn't announce itself gradually, it just arrives all at once like a door slamming open. Visibility dropped from a quarter mile to 30 feet in the space of 20 minutes. The temperature plunged. The wind went from brisk to brutal. Mrs. Calloway made the call to return to the vehicles immediately. They had the students moving within 4 minutes. Ethan was at the back of the group, counting heads, keeping the slower walkers moving, watching the trail behind them. He counted 38 students. He counted again. 38. The bus held 39. He grabbed Mrs. Calloway's arm. We're one short. She stopped. What? 38. We have 38 students. The manifest says 39. Her face went the specific white of a person whose 11-year perfect record is standing on the edge of a cliff. That's not who's missing. Ethan was already running the faces through his memory. The human mind under pressure does remarkable things. His had been cataloging these students for 2 days without him consciously deciding to their habits, their groups, where they tended to drift. He knew before she finished the sentence. Lily Grayson, he said. She wasn't hiking with the main group. She went ahead on the side trail. Which side trail? He pointed into the white. Mrs. Calloway's radio crackled. The other teacher, Mr. Dennis, reporting in from the bus. All students accounted for. Except she's not here, Ethan said. I need to go back. Absolutely not. Mrs. Calloway's voice was firm now, back in control, the way authority sounds when it's most afraid. We call mountain rescue. We get everyone to the ranger station. We wait for professionals. That storm is moving at Ethan. She put her hand on his chest. You are not trained for search and rescue. If you go out there, I have 2 missing people instead of 1. Do you understand what I'm telling you? He understood what she was telling him. He also understood that Lily Grayson had gone up a side trail 3 hours ago, that the temperature was dropping at roughly 5 degrees per hour, that hypothermia in conditions like these could become life-threatening in under 2 hours for someone who wasn't prepared, that she'd been wearing a plain dark jacket, not gear, not layers, a jacket. He understood all of that. He got everyone to the ranger station. He helped Mrs. Calloway get the students inside. He helped Mr. Dennis radio the emergency services and provide coordinates. He watched the dispatcher explain that in current conditions, a helicopter was grounded and ground rescue teams were a minimum of 90 minutes out. 90 minutes. He did the math quietly. Then he went to the equipment locker in the ranger station and started going through it. What are you doing? Mr. Dennis appeared in the doorway. Looking for rope. He found it. 50 feet of orange polypropylene rescue line. He clipped it to his belt loop. And emergency thermal blankets. He found 2. He put them in his jacket pockets. And anything that functions as a locating marker. Ethan, I need you to tie off one end of this rope to the exterior railing, Ethan said. The other end stays with me. When the rope runs out, I'll use my own sense of direction and the wind orientation to navigate back. The wind is coming consistently from the northwest. As long as I know which way the wind is hitting my face, I can track direction. You are not doing this. The station railing, Ethan said. Please. Mrs. Calloway appeared behind Mr. Dennis. She looked at Ethan, really looked at him, maybe for the first time since he'd stepped onto the bus. Something moved across her face, not quite approval, something more complicated than that. You know you might not come back, she said. Yes, ma'am. She might not be findable. Yes, ma'am. Then why? Because somebody has to go. His voice was quiet, level. The voice of someone who had already made the decision and was past the point of explaining it. And right now, I'm the only one willing. The silence in that room lasted a long time. Then Mrs. Calloway nodded once. The railing, she said to Mr. Dennis. Help him with the rope. The door opened. The cold hit Ethan like a wall. He stepped through it. Behind him, through the door already closing, he heard a voice, one of the students, a boy saying to his friend, with the particular carelessness of someone who expected other people to handle danger for them. He's literally going to die out there. What's wrong with him? Ethan didn't stop walking. The rope went taut after 20 steps. He unclipped it. He was on his own. The snow was coming sideways now. Driven by a wind that had real violence in it, the kind that gets inside your collar and your sleeves and finds the gap between your gloves and your cuffs and works at you like something deliberate. Every step required twice the effort of normal walking. The drifts were above his knees in places. He moved by feel and memory and the knowledge of where Lily had turned off the main trail. He counted his steps, 100, 200. The side trail was barely a trail, more of a gap between trees where the undergrowth thinned. He'd noticed it on the way out because he noticed things. He turned into it and the wind shifted at his cheek, which was what he expected. He adjusted. He moved deeper into the white. By the 200th step off the main trail, he could no longer see more than 3 feet in any direction. The world had reduced itself to the sound of wind, the resistance of snow, and the dull ache of cold working its way through his canvas jacket. He should have brought better gear. He didn't have better gear. He kept moving. Lily. His voice went 5 feet and got swallowed. Lily Grayson, wind, snow, nothing. He tried to think the way she'd think. She'd gone up the side trail, why not following anyone? She was the kind of person who didn't follow groups. Maybe she'd been wanting some air, some distance from the manufactured social experience of 42 teenagers who had all decided to pretend she wasn't there. He understood that impulse completely. When you're invisible in a crowd, sometimes the only way to feel real is to be actually alone. So she'd taken the side trail. She'd gone up probably, because up is what you do when you want to see something clearly. He angled toward the higher ground. 300 steps, 400. His left hand had lost most of its feeling. He tucked it against his chest. His breathing was getting harder, not from exertion, but from the cold working on his lungs. Each inhale felt like something being carved. Lily. And then faint muffled, from somewhere above and to the left, something that wasn't wind. He stopped, listened. It came again. Not a voice, not even a word, just a sound, a human sound, the sound a person makes when they're too cold and too tired to be loud, but they're still trying. Ethan drove himself toward it. He found her against the base of a large pine tree 40 feet off the side trail, sitting with her knees pulled to her chest and her arms wrapped around herself. Her jacket was dark with melted snow. Her lips had gone the blue-gray color that meant the body was running out of ways to compensate. Her eyes were open barely, and when she saw him, something moved through them, relief and disbelief fighting for the same space. Hey, he said. He dropped to his knees in front of her. Hey, she said. Her voice was a wreck, thin and shaking the words coming out of a body that had been spending every bit of its energy on just staying alive. You, she stopped. Started again. You came back for me. I did. Why? The word carried real bewilderment, not performance. She genuinely didn't understand. He didn't answer that yet. He pulled the thermal blanket from his pocket and snapped it open, the crinkle crack of emergency foil sounding ridiculous and necessary in the middle of all that silence. He wrapped it around her shoulders. She let him. Can you feel your feet? He asked. Some. She paused. Not much. That's okay. That's okay. We're going to work on that. He pulled the second blanket out and wrapped it over the first one, tucking it around her legs. Can you stand? I don't. She tried, made it halfway up her legs, shaking so badly he could see it, then her knees buckled. He caught her. Okay, not yet. He held her steady. She grabbed his jacket with both hands, that grip, the desperate, involuntary grip of someone who has found something solid in a situation that has been nothing but falling and he felt it like something being settled. You shouldn't have come, she said into his jacket. You could get killed out here. Probably, he agreed. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. That's not a reassuring answer. No, he said. It's not. He shifted so he could look at her face. Her color was bad, not getting worse in the last 30 seconds, which he told himself was a good sign even though he wasn't sure it was. Tell me about your dad. She blinked. What? Talk to me. I need you talking, okay. Tell me about your dad. Something happened in her expression. The wariness was still there, that thing she wore, like armor, the careful flatness, but underneath it something warm and unguarded moved when he said the word dad. She stopped, seemed to make a decision. He's not what people think. No. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. He coached my soccer team when I was 8. He's the one who taught me to read a compass, her voice hitched, which is kind of useless right now because I don't have one. He makes terrible pancakes on Sunday mornings and refuses to admit they're terrible. She paused. He cried when I got into the top academic program. He thought I didn't see it, but I saw it. Ethan listened. He understood what it was to have a father who was more than the version of him the world decided to see. His own father, the man with the bad back and the quiet pride, and the way he'd pressed his hand to Ethan's shoulder the morning of the bank meeting and said, "Son, you don't have to do this, you know." And they both knew that wasn't true. And neither of them said that his father was also more than what people assumed when they looked at a struggling farm. He sounds good, Ethan said. He is. Her voice was steadier. The talking was helping. He kept her talking. He's going to be so angry I got lost. He's going to be relieved you got found. You don't know him. No, but I know Des. He shifted his weight, pulled her slightly closer against the warmth of his body. The wind was still hammering them, but the tree provided some break from the worst of it. What's his name? Mason. She paused. People call him Grizzly. Why Grizzly? The almost laugh again, warmer this time. Because when I was about 6, he got between a tourist and an actual grizzly bear at a campground. Stood there and yelled at it until it left. Did it work? Obviously, he's still here. She looked up at him. He yells at things until they move. It's kind of his whole thing. Good, Ethan said. Because when your dad gets here, I want him to be the kind of man who yells at problems until they move. We could use that energy right now. She laughed for real that time. Broken and shivering, but real. He held the sound of it like something valuable. The cold was working on him now too. He was aware of it the way you become aware of something you've been ignoring suddenly and all at once. His fingers were operating on muscle memory more than sensation. His left side facing away from the tree and into the wind had gone from painful to just heavy and numb, which he knew was not a good progression. He did not tell Lily that. He kept her talking. He talked back. He told her about the farm, about his father's accident, about the bank meeting when he was 19. He told her about hauling water in 5-gallon buckets. He told her about the YouTube videos he'd watched to learn how to repair a hydraulic line at midnight. He told her things he'd never said out loud to anyone because there was something about being this cold and this honest that stripped away the usual reasons you kept things to yourself. She listened. Her grip on his jacket had loosened slightly, not letting go but less desperate. Her color was better. He was nearly certain her color was better. You should have gone to college, she said. Maybe. You're smart, he shrugged. Smart doesn't get water out of a broken pump. No, she said quietly. It doesn't. She looked at him for a long moment. I'm sorry about the bus. What about the bus? I heard what they said about you when you got on. She watched his face. You heard it too. He didn't deny it. Does it bother you? She asked. He thought about the honest answer. It used to bother me more, he said. Now it mostly just, he searched for the word, confirms things. What things? Oh, that most people are only looking at the surface. They see the jacket and the boots and they decide they already know the whole story. He paused. Doesn't make them bad people necessarily. Just uncareful ones. She was quiet for a moment. The wind shifted, driving snow at them from a different angle, and he moved to block it with his body. They did the same thing to me, she said. Look at the surface, see my dad's patch, and decide they know everything. Yeah. It's exhausting, she said. Explaining that you're a real person to people who've already decided you're just a category. Yeah, he said, it is. They sat with that for a moment. Two people who had both spent years being aggressively misunderstood, sitting in the middle of a mountain blizzard, discovering that the most comfortable silence either of them had found in a long time was happening right now in circumstances that should have been nothing but terrible. Then the cold settled harder. His body registered it as something mechanical, the way an engine registers when fuel is running low. Not panic, just a kind of ticking down, a system reducing its operations to the most essential. He was aware that he needed to keep Lily awake and talking, and that he was having increasing difficulty holding up his own end of the conversation. Ethan. Her voice had changed, sharp and focused. She was watching his face. Hey, stay with me. He blinked. I'm here. You're getting cold. I'm fine. You are not fine. You gave me both blankets, and you've been blocking the wind for... She stopped. How long have we been here? Don't worry about how long. He checked his sense of time, which was less reliable than he would have liked. Maybe 40 minutes, maybe more. She said a word that surprised him. He almost smiled. She unwrapped one of the thermal blankets from around herself and started pulling it over his shoulders too. He resisted. She was surprisingly strong for someone who'd been half frozen 20 minutes ago. Stop it, she said. Don't be stupid. Share. We need to both be alive when help comes. Stop arguing with me. He stopped arguing with her. They sat under the shared blanket, their backs against the pine tree, and the wind howled over them, and the snow came down, and the world was reduced to the 10 feet of white around them, and the sound of two people breathing. He thought distantly about his parents, about his father who would be working through the afternoon with Roy not knowing, about his mother who would see the weather on the news and not yet know her son was in it. He thought about how strange it was to be 20 years old and sitting on a mountainside next to a girl he'd known for less than 2 days, and to feel, despite everything, despite the cold and the fear, and the very genuine possibility that rescue was going to come too late, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He didn't say that out loud. Some things you keep because they're too true for words. My dad is gonna come looking, Lily said quietly. I know. He won't wait for permission. She sounded certain in a way that had nothing to do with hope. It was knowledge. He never waits for permission. Good. He's going to be... She stopped, started again. Her voice was careful now, like she was choosing each word deliberately. He's going to see you here, with me, like this, in whatever he thinks about you before he knows anything about you. She paused. I need you to know that what comes after that first look is going to be different. From him, at least. Ethan didn't fully understand what she meant yet. He would. Stay awake, she said. I'm awake. Tell me something. Like what? Anything. Tell me about the farm. Tell me what it looks like in the summer. He thought about it, about the 43 acres in July, the way the ridge looked in the early morning light, the cattle moving slow and certain through the field, the way his father sat on the porch steps some evenings, just looking at it like he was memorizing something. He started talking. She listened. The snow came down, the temperature dropped another degree, and somewhere below them, on roads that were becoming impossible, engines were starting. Not car engines, not rescue vehicles, something different, something with a particular, unmistakable sound that Lily Grayson had been hearing her whole life and knew even half frozen on a mountainside in a blizzard like she knew her own heartbeat. She closed her eyes. He's coming, she said. Ethan didn't ask how she knew. He just kept talking about the farm, and the cold settled around them like something patient. And somewhere below, the engines grew louder. The sound came before anything else. That was how it always was with Mason Grayson. You heard him before you saw him, and by the time you saw him, you'd already made up your mind about what you were looking at. Most people made up their minds wrong. His phone had rung at 4:17 in the afternoon. He'd been underneath a 74 shovel head that a brother had been trying to resurrect for 6 months, his hands dark with grease, half his attention on the engine, and half on the argument happening across the garage about whether the carburetor was the problem or the symptom. It was the kind of afternoon he liked, loud and purposeful and full of people who knew what they were doing and did it without drama. The number on the screen was a Virginia area code he didn't recognize. He answered on the second ring. He always answered unknown numbers. In his experience, the calls you expected were rarely the ones that mattered. Mr. Grayson, a woman's voice, controlled but barely, the kind of control that comes from professional training, fighting very hard against genuine fear. This is Margaret Calloway. I'm the lead teacher on Lily's school mountain trip. I need to tell you. Is she hurt? He was already sitting up. She's missing, sir. There's a storm. We lost track of her on a side trail. Mountain rescue is there at least 90 minutes out. We have a young man who went out to look for her, but Mason Grayson was already on his feet. Where? He said. I can send you the coordinates, but Mr. Grayson, the roads are the conditions are where? She gave him the coordinates. He was already walking toward the center of the garage, the phone still against his ear, the grease still on his hands, his voice carrying across the noise, the way his voice always carried, not because he was the loudest person in the room, but because he was the most certain. Boys, he said, the argument about the carburetor stopped. Every head in the garage turned. Mason Grayson looked at the faces of the men who had been his brothers for over 2 decades. Mechanics, fathers, veterans. Men who had worked alongside him argued with him, showed up at his door at 3 a.m. when his wife left, and he wasn't handling it the way he should have been. Men who had watched Lily grow up in this garage, who had taught her to change a tire at age 9, and had shown her the stars through the skylight in the roof, and had never once, not for a single day, let her feel like she was anything less than someone worth protecting. He said one sentence. Lily's missing on a mountain in a blizzard. The garage moved. There was no drama to it. No raised voices, no confusion about roles. This was what these men were, not the thing people assumed when they saw the patches, not the newspaper story, not the reputation that had been built over decades of misunderstanding by people who only ever looked at the surface. They were men who knew how to respond when something mattered, and nothing mattered more than Lily. Within 7 minutes, Mason had made 4 calls. 2 to men who owned snow vehicles, 1 to a brother with search and rescue training, actual certified training, from when he'd volunteered with the county emergency services for 3 years before a knee injury ended it. 1 to the ranger station directly where a woman named Karen answered and told him what she knew, which was that a young man named Ethan Walker had gone out into the storm with 50 feet of rope and 2 thermal blankets about 45 minutes ago and hadn't come back yet. Mason sat with that information for exactly 3 seconds. Ethan Walker, he repeated. Yes, sir. He works on a farm. He's 20 years old. He refused to stay inside. Karen paused. I've been doing this job for 11 years. I want you to know I tried to talk him out of it. He said somebody had to go. Mason closed his eyes. He knew that feeling. He'd been 20 once. He knew what it meant to look at a situation where everyone else was waiting for permission and decide that you were the one who was going to move. It wasn't courage exactly, or it wasn't only courage. It was a particular kind of clarity, the ability to see past the noise of everyone else's fear and ask yourself the only question that actually mattered. Someone needed help. Were you going or weren't you? Keep that radio on, he told Karen. We're coming. He hung up. He looked at the men around him. He said the only thing left to say. Let's ride. The conditions on the mountain road were objectively terrible. Mason knew this. He was not a man who ignored reality in favor of feeling. He'd been riding in bad weather for 25 years, and he understood exactly what ice and blown snow did to traction, exactly what reduced visibility meant for reaction time, exactly what the difference was between courage and stupidity. He also understood math. 90 minutes for official rescue. Lily had been out for at least an hour already, probably longer. Ethan Walker, 20 years old, farm jacket, 50 feet of rope, had been out for 45 minutes. In these conditions, 2 hours was the number that mattered. 2 hours was where hypothermia stopped being an emergency and started being a tragedy. They had maybe 50 minutes. He rode at the front of the column. Behind him, 6 men on the 2 snowmobiles they'd loaded fast, one with the rescue equipment, 1 rig for carrying injured. The rest in 2 trucks with chains on all 4 tires. His own bike modified with studded tires he'd installed 3 winters ago for exactly this kind of situation. The road up the mountain was closed to regular traffic. The barrier said so clearly. Mason rode through it without slowing down. Behind him, without a word, everyone followed. The ranger station was a specific kind of quiet when they arrived, the quiet of a building full of people who are afraid and doing their best not to show each other how afraid they are. Mason came through the door with snow on his jacket and his face and the particular expression he had when he was operating, which was not ragically, but was adjacent to it. Focused, purposeful. The carburetor and shovelhead afternoon was a different world. Mrs. Calloway stood up from the bench where she'd been sitting. She was a woman of maybe 55, silver-haired, the kind of person who had clearly been competent and in control for so long that losing control had hit her harder than it would have hit most. She looked at Mason Grayson, the vest, the patches, the grease still on his hands, the men coming in behind him, and something moved through her face that was complicated. He didn't give her time to work through it. "Which trail?" he said. "Mr. Grayson, Mountain Rescue is—" "Which trail?" she told him. He was already turning. His brother Cal, the one with the search and rescue training, was right behind him, already pulling on the thermal gear from the pack he'd brought from the garage. The others fanned out with the efficiency of people who had worked together a long time. "Radio check," Mason said. "On Channel 7, Cal confirmed. "We go out in pairs. Stay in voice contact. The boy went east on the side trail. He knows what he's doing, so we follow his logic, not the map. If he went looking for her, he thought about where she'd go. We think about the same thing." "You know the kid?" someone asked. "No," Mason said. "But I know the kind of person who walks into a storm alone for someone they don't owe anything to." He went out the door into the white. Inside the ranger station, a boy named Tyler Marsh, 17 years old, son of a portfolio manager, the one who had said on the bus that Ethan was going to die out there, was watching through the window. He'd been watching for the last 10 minutes since the motorcycles and trucks arrived. He'd watched Mason Grayson come in and turn the whole room's energy around in under 30 seconds. He'd watched men who should have looked terrifying walk with the focused calm of people who were absolutely certain about what they were doing. He turned to the kid sitting next to him, a boy named Jordan, who had been his best friend since 6th grade. "I said that stuff about Ethan on the bus," Tyler said. Jordan looked at him. "What stuff?" "That he was going to die out there. That he was being stupid." Tyler watched Mason disappear into the storm. "I was the one who said that about him when he got on the bus. The manure thing." Jordan was quiet. "I was being an idiot," Tyler said. Jordan didn't disagree. "If he finds her," Tyler stopped, started again. "When he finds her, I'm going to—" He couldn't finish the sentence because he didn't know yet what came after it, but he felt it sitting in his chest like something that needed to move. Outside in the storm, Mason Grayson moved through the snow and thought about his daughter. He thought about her the way he always thought about her in moments like this. Not with fear, because fear was a waste of energy, but with the particular fierce clarity of a man who had organized his entire life around one central fact, which was that Lily was everything. She was the reason he'd stayed in this town when he could have moved the chapter 3 times over. She was the reason he'd put her soccer schedule on the garage wall calendar alongside the maintenance appointments. She was the reason he'd sat through 17 parent-teacher conferences in 15 years wearing his cleanest shirt, sitting across from people who couldn't hide their discomfort fast enough, listening carefully to everything they said about his daughter, and ignoring everything they implied about him. She was 17 and brilliant and funny and lonely in a way he couldn't fully fix no matter how hard he tried, because the loneliness came from the space between who she was and what people assumed about her, and that space had been there her whole life, and it was his fault. He knew that. He had never said it out loud. It sat in him like an old engine knock always there running underneath everything, something you learn to live with but never forget. She deserved better than to inherit his reputation. She deserved to be seen. "Grizzly," Cal's voice on the radio. "I've got track marks east of the side trail junction. Fresh, 2 sets." Mason stopped. 2. One going in, one wait. A pause. "Both going in." Someone followed the first set. "Walker found the trail," Mason said. "He went in after her. Looks like maybe 20 minutes ahead of us." "Then we closed 20 minutes. He was already moving in that direction. Call out when you see anything." The wind was vicious. He'd been in worse, not much worse, but worse. He kept his face down and his sense of direction fixed on the compass he wore around his neck, a habit from years ago that had saved him twice in his life and that he'd never broken. His boots were good. His gear was good. He'd made sure of that before he left the garage, 30 seconds of grabbing exactly the right things, the kind of preparation that comes from a lifetime of taking bad situations seriously. He was thinking about Ethan Walker, 20 years old, farm kid, fill-in chaperone, $42 a day, probably maybe less. Went into a mountain blizzard alone for a girl he'd known 2 days because, in Cal's words, when he'd repeated what Karen told him, somebody had to go. Mason had met a lot of people in his life. He'd met brave ones and stupid ones, and the kind who were brave in the way that was actually just stupid in better clothes. He'd met men twice Walker's age who had never once in their lives done anything that wasn't first calculated for personal cost. He thought about the boy's logic. He thought about what it said about a person, not the jacket, not the boots, not the bank account, to look at a situation where the cost to yourself was potentially everything and decide that someone else's need was worth more than your own safety. That wasn't nothing. That was everything. Lily, his voice went out into the white and got consumed. He kept moving. What he didn't know, what nobody in the ranger station knew yet, because there was no way to know, it was what was happening 40 feet up the slope under a pine tree between the girl everyone had been writing off for years and the boy everyone had been overlooking. Lily was talking. She talked because Ethan had asked her to, and then she talked because it turned out that talking to someone who was actually listening, there was something she hadn't done in a while, and the experience was enough to override even the cold, at least partially. She talked about her father's terrible Sunday pancakes and about the soccer team he'd coached and about the way he'd cried very quietly when she got into the academic program, and about how none of that ever got through to the people who made up their minds about the Graysons based on the vest and the bike and the patch. Ethan listened the way good listeners listen, not waiting for his turn to talk, but actually receiving what she said, holding it, responding to the real thing underneath the words. He told her things in return, about the farm in Jalapa and about the ridge in early morning, about his father sitting on the porch steps in the evening light, looking at 43 acres like he was memorizing them. "He sounds like my dad," Lily said. Ethan looked at her. "What do you mean?" "The way you describe him, like he knows exactly what he has and he's grateful for it, even when it's hard." She paused. "My dad's like that. He doesn't have much compared to you." She gestured vaguely in the direction of the students who were warm inside the ranger station. "But he acts like he's richer than all of them, like wealth is the wrong measurement for what he has." "Maybe it is," Ethan said. "Maybe what I am," she agreed. She could feel the cold through the blanket now. The thermal material was good, but it wasn't infinite, and two people sharing the warmth of a single emergency foil wrap in a blizzard was working against math that didn't care about effort or goodwill. She was aware of Ethan's temperature too, the way his words were coming slightly slower, the way his left hand, which she'd pulled under the blanket 20 minutes ago, was still not warm. "Tell me something true," she said. He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean something real, not polite, something you'd normally not say." He thought about it. She watched him think about it, and she thought that most people asked that question would perform an answer, would produce something that sounded real without actually costing them anything. She could tell from the way Ethan went quiet that he was actually looking for the honest thing. "I'm scared," he said finally. "Not of dying exactly, of not making it back with you, of having come out here and it not being enough." She sat with that. "That's what you're scared of. Not yourself, but not being enough for someone else." "Yeah." She looked at him for a long time. "That's either the most selfless thing I've ever heard," she said, "or you're the weirdest 20-year-old alive." "Both," he said, "probably both." She laughed, her second real laugh in the storm, warmer than the first. It lasted longer. When it faded, something had shifted between them, the particular shift that happens when two people stop being strangers and become something harder to name. "Your turn," he said. "Something true." She didn't hesitate. "I applied to 3 colleges out of state. I got into all of them." She looked at her hands. "I haven't told my dad yet, because leaving means he's alone, and he'll tell me to go and mean it, and I don't know how to do something that hurts him, even if it's right for me." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "He'd want you to go," he said. "I know. That doesn't make it easier." "No," she said, "it really doesn't." They sat with that, two people carrying the weight of loving parents who had given them everything and whom they would somehow have to grow beyond. Then Cal's voice broke the silence. Not his voice exactly, the distant sound of a voice calling muffled by snow and distance, but unmistakably human and unmistakably searching, coming from somewhere below and to their left. Lily's whole body changed. "That's..." She stopped, swallowed. "That's one of my dad's brothers. That's Cal. I know his voice. Ethan's eyes went to her face. He came, she said. And for the first time since he'd found her, her voice cracked completely, not from cold, not from fear, but from pure relief, the kind that hits you all at once when you've been holding it together and suddenly you don't have to anymore. He actually came. I told you, Ethan said. You did. She pressed the heel of her hand to her eye. You did tell me. Hey. He kept his voice level, though something in his chest had gone loose with its own version of relief. Save the crying for after. We need to make noise. Can you do that? She pulled in a breath, steadied herself. Yeah, she said. Yeah, I can do that. On three. They called out together, his voice and hers joining and climbing, not loud enough by themselves, but together carrying through the wind in a way that one voice couldn't. Below them, they heard the calling stop. Then they heard it again closer, moving fast, more than one voice now. And then Mason Grayson's voice, not muffled anymore, cutting through the last 20 feet of storm with the particular force of a man whose entire life had narrowed to a single point. And that point was just ahead, just there, just Lily. She was already on her feet. Ethan stood with her one hand at her back because her legs were still unreliable, and she lurched forward through the snow toward her father's voice, and they collided somewhere in the white Mason, dropping to his knees in the snow, his arms around his daughter, her face against his shoulder, both of them making sounds that were not words but didn't need to be. Ethan stepped back. He gave them the space that moment deserved. Cal appeared at his shoulder. The man was 50, thick-shouldered, dark-eyed, moving with the economical efficiency of someone who had done this in some form before. He looked Ethan over in the quick, thorough way of someone assessing a situation. You Walker, Cal said. Yeah. Cal looked at Lily and Mason, looked back at Ethan. You went out alone. Yeah. In that jacket. Ethan looked down at the canvas work jacket. Yeah. Cal made a sound in his throat, not quite a laugh, not quite something else. He pulled a foil blanket from his pack and put it around Ethan's shoulders without asking, then pressed a hand briefly to the back of his neck. Good work, son, Cal said quietly. That was all. It was enough. Mason lifted his face from Lily's hair. He looked up and found Ethan standing 2 feet away. The snow was still coming down, the wind still doing what wind does, and there was no dramatic pause, no swelling music. There was just a man looking at a boy, and the look carrying everything that the situation contained: gratitude so enormous it had nowhere clean to go, and something behind it that was older and more complicated. The particular feeling a parent has when someone they've never met has done the thing they would have given everything to be able to do themselves. Mason Grayson had not cried in front of another person in 14 years. He came close right then. He stood up. He walked the 2 steps to Ethan. He looked him in the face, really looked at him the way he looked at engines, reading everything underneath the surface, and he said, You went out alone. Somebody had to go, Ethan said. His voice was steadier than he felt. In that jacket, Mason said. Ethan almost smiled. Yeah, I know. Mason grabbed his hand and shook it, and the handshake became something firmer. Then a handshake, one hand gripping Ethan's, and the other coming to his shoulder holding on. I don't know your full story, Mason said, but I'm going to. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Can you walk? Mason asked. Yeah. Good, because we're getting off this mountain. He kept his grip on Ethan's shoulder a moment longer. All of us. They went down together, Cal on one side of Lily Mason on the other, Ethan between the other 2 brothers who had come up the slope. The wind was still working on them. The snow hadn't let up, but the math had changed the warmth of bodies, the gear, the direction, the fact that they were moving instead of waiting. Lily reached out as they walked and found Ethan's arm. She held it without saying anything. He didn't pull away. They were halfway down when they heard the helicopter rescue services finally airborne as the worst of the storm's front edge passed. It didn't matter now. What it would have changed 40 minutes ago, it didn't need to change anymore. What mattered was they were all walking. Inside the ranger station, Tyler Marsh was the first person to see them come through the door. He'd been watching the window for 20 minutes, standing up every few minutes and sitting back down, unable to make himself stay seated, and equally unable to do anything useful. When the door opened and Mason came through with Lily, and then Ethan behind them, Tyler stood up so fast he knocked his water bottle off the bench. Nobody laughed. Mrs. Calloway made a sound that might have been a prayer. Lily looked up and scanned the room. The students, the teachers, The faces that had spent 2 days deciding what she was without bothering to find out, and something in her expression was different from any expression she'd worn since the bus. The chin was up, the careful flatness was gone. She looked tired and cold, and underneath it, steady in a way she hadn't been before. Like something had been settled. Ethan came through the door last and stopped. The room was looking at him. He wasn't used to rooms looking at him. He wasn't sure what to do with it. Mason Grayson stepped in beside him and said loudly enough for the room to hear, "This is Ethan Walker. Everybody remember that name." Nobody in that room forgot it. Tyler Marsh pushed through to the front. He stood in front of Ethan, 6 inches shorter, 3 times the wardrobe budget, looking like he was about to say something, and discovering that words were harder than he'd expected. "I said something stupid on the bus," Tyler said. Ethan looked at him. "About you, before we even left." Tyler's jaw worked. I wanted you to know that I know that." Ethan studied him for a moment. The boy was genuinely uncomfortable. Not performing it, actually sitting in the discomfort of his own behavior, which was harder than it looked and rarer than it should have been. "Okay," Ethan said. Tyler waited for more. There wasn't more. "That's it," Tyler said. "You said what you said. Now you said this." Ethan shrugged. "What else is there?" Tyler blinked. He'd expected anger, or at minimum, a longer accounting. He didn't get either. He got the same level unhurried attention he'd watched Ethan give everything else, and it was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. "Okay," Tyler said finally. "Yeah, okay." He stepped back. Lily appeared at Ethan's shoulder. She had a cup of hot coffee that someone had pressed into her hands, and she gave it to him without asking. He accepted it without arguing. The warmth of the cup through his fingers felt like something being restored. They stood there, the crowded room, the farm boy and the biker's daughter, close enough that their arms were touching, and around them the room was doing what rooms do after something frightening has resolved, exhaling, shifting the low-grade conversation of people recalibrating back to normal. But normal felt different now. Cal appeared at Mason's side. He said quietly, "She needs a hospital. Mild hypothermia, but she needs to be checked." "And him," Lily said. "Not a question." Cal glanced at Ethan. "Yeah, and him." Mason nodded. He looked across the room at the transport situation, the ranch trucks outside, the weather still rough, but passable now, the rescue helicopter just touching down in the clearing. He made the calculation. "We're not waiting for transport," he said. "We're taking them ourselves." Mrs. Calloway, who had been quietly falling apart and quietly pulling herself back together in the corner, straightened up. "The school has protocols." "Ma'am," Mason said, not unkindly, with respect. "Your protocols are for situations where the result could still change. The result changed 40 minutes ago out on that mountain." He held her eyes. "These 2 kids are getting medical attention tonight, and they're getting it fast, and my brothers and I are going to make sure of that. You can follow us to the hospital, or you can call it in however you need to, but we're moving." She looked at him, she looked at Lily, she looked at Ethan. "Drive safe," she said. Mason almost smiled. Ethan was in the truck within 3 minutes, sandwiched between Cal and a brother named Donnie, who had been driving mountain roads for 30 years and treated the ice like a conversation he already knew how to have. The heat was up. Someone had found a heavier jacket for him to put over the canvas one. His left hand was tingling back to life in a way that was more painful than the numbness had been, and significantly more welcome. He looked out the window at the dark and the snow, and let himself, just for a moment, stop running the calculations. They were out. Lily was alive. That was the only number that mattered. "Hey," Donnie's voice without taking his eyes from the road. "You ever ridden in a truck driven by an old Hell's Angel before?" "No," Ethan said. Donnie glanced at him. "How's it feel?" Ethan thought about it. The heat, the movement, the sensation returning to his fingers, the knowledge that an hour ago he'd been sitting in a snowstorm, waiting to find out which direction things were going to go. "Feels good," he said. Donnie nodded like that was the right answer. He turned his eyes back to the road and drove them down the mountain through the dark in the clearing snow, steady and certain with the ease of someone who had been moving through difficult terrain for so long, it had become the only kind of terrain he truly trusted. Behind them in the other truck, Mason Grayson rode with his daughter's head against his shoulder and one hand resting on top of hers, and he did not say anything for a long time. Then Lily said, "He went out alone, Dad, in that jacket with 50 feet of rope." "I know," Mason said. "He wasn't going to leave me." I know. She was quiet for a moment. Then, nobody has ever done that for me before. Someone who didn't have to. Mason pressed his lips together. He looked out at the road ahead, the headlights cutting through the last of the storm. Then it's past time, he said quietly. Lily rested her head back on his shoulder. And Mason Grayson thought about a 20-year-old boy in a canvas work jacket who had decided in the middle of a mountain blizzard that somebody had to go and had been in every way that actually mattered exactly right. He wasn't done thinking about that. Not even close. The hospital was the kind of small regional facility that handled everything from farm accidents to hunting injuries, staffed by people who had seen enough real emergencies to move without fuss and ask questions later. They took Lillian first and Ethan second, and the next 2 hours belonged to doctors and nurses and the particular organized chaos of people doing their jobs well under pressure. Mason sat in the waiting room and did not pace. He was not a pacer. Pacing was for people who needed to burn off the feeling because they didn't know what to do with it. Mason knew exactly what to do with it. He sat with it. He let it be as large as it was. He'd learned a long time ago that the feelings that scared you most were the ones you tried to walk away from, and the ones you sat with were the ones that eventually resolved into something you could carry. Cal sat beside him. Donnie was at the vending machine. 3 other brothers occupied chairs along the opposite wall, quiet present the way these men always were when something mattered, not performing concern, just actually there. A nurse came out at the 40-minute mark and spoke to Mason directly. Lily's core temperature was coming up normally, mild hypothermia as Cal had assessed, no lasting damage expected. She was going to be fine. Mason nodded. He said thank you. He did not show the room what that information cost him to receive, which was everything he had. What about the boy, he asked. Ethan Walker. The nurse hesitated. Are you family? Mason looked at her without blinking. I'm the reason his family still has someone to come home to, he said. What about the pawn? She checked her tablet. Similar presentation. His exposure was longer and more severe, given his clothing situation. He's responding well. Some nerve sensitivity in the left hand that should resolve. They're keeping him overnight for observation. Good, Mason said. Who's paying for that? The nurse looked up. I'm sorry. His hospital stay. Who's covering it? I'm not sure that's a question I can find out, Mason said, and tell whoever handles that it's covered, whatever it is. The nurse looked at him for a moment, at the vest, the patches, the grease that was still under his fingernails at 9:30 at night, and to her credit, she didn't hesitate. I'll make a note, she said and went back through the door. Cal looked at Mason sidelong. You didn't even ask the number. Doesn't matter what the number is, Mason said. Cal nodded once. He knew his brother well enough not to argue about that. It was another 20 minutes before they let Mason in to see Lily. She was sitting up in the hospital bed with color returning to her face, an IV in her arm, wearing a hospital gown that she was clearly annoyed about. And she looked at her father when he came through the door with the same expression she'd been giving him since she was about 4 years old. Relief and irritation occupying the same face simultaneously, because she had never once in her life been able to feel one thing at a time. You broke through a road barrier, she said. The barrier was in my way, he said. You could have been arrested. I could have been a lot of things. He sat in the chair beside her bed and took her hand. I chose to be here. She looked at him. Something moved through her face that she didn't bother to hide because she was too tired to maintain the armor. I was scared, she said. I want you to know I wasn't scared the whole time. At the end, I wasn't scared. Because of Walker. Because of Ethan, she corrected gently. His name is Ethan, Dad. Mason squeezed her hand. Tell me. So she told him all of it, the side trail, the tree, the cold, the 2 thermal blankets he'd split with her, the conversation about fathers and pancakes and farms and college applications, and the particular loneliness of being a person nobody bothered to actually look at. She told him about the moment Ethan's temperature started dropping, and he wouldn't admit it, and how she'd wrestled the blanket back around both of them. She told him about calling out together on 3 and hearing the voices coming up the slope. Mason listened without interrupting. It was a discipline he'd practiced for 17 years, letting Lily finish before he responded, because she thought out loud and she needed the space to get to the real thing. And the real thing was never the first thing she said. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He told you about his dad, Mason said. And his farm. And the bank meeting when he was 19. She paused. He talked about your family the same way you talk about ours. Like it's the thing that matters more than anything else, and also the thing that costs the most. Mason sat with that. He's 20 years old. I know. Running a farm after his father got hurt. I know. Took a 3-day job for $42 a day because they needed money for a water pump. Lily looked at him carefully. How do you know about the water pump? Karen at the ranger station. She talked to him before he went out. Mason turned her hand over in his, studying it the way he studied something he wanted to understand. She said he told her the money was for a pump. Said it like it was just the reason he was there, not like it was a thing he was ashamed of. He's not ashamed of anything, Lily said. He just is what he is. He doesn't apologize for it, and he doesn't explain it. She paused. I've never met anyone like that before. At his age, Mason shook his head slowly. Neither have I. The night settled around the hospital. The storm outside had dropped to a manageable snowfall, the kind that was quiet and almost pretty after what had preceded it, the way things sometimes got gentle after they'd done their worst. Mason stayed until Lily fell asleep, which happened faster than she would have admitted. She needed her body simply shutting down the performance of being fine and taking the rest it had been demanding for hours. He stood in the doorway for a moment looking at her. 17. Brilliant. Lonely in the specific way she was lonely, which broke something in him every time he let himself feel it clearly. Going to college in the fall, she hadn't told him yet, but he already knew. He'd seen the application materials on her desk 3 months ago and said nothing, waiting for her to find the right moment. He understood why she was taking her time with it. He understood the cost of growing past the people you loved most, and he wasn't going to make it harder than it already was. He closed her door softly and went looking for Ethan Walker. The room was 2 doors down from Lily's. Ethan was awake, the particular awake of someone who had been given warmth and fluids in the absence of immediate crisis and whose body had decided to process all of it at once instead of letting him sleep. He was sitting up against the pillows, his left hand wrapped in something that looked like a warming compress, staring at the middle distance with the expression of a person reviewing a long list of things internally. He looked up when Mason appeared in the doorway. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Mason had been in this situation before, standing across from someone he needed to address properly and not having a clean way in. He was not a man who made speeches. He was a man who said the thing directly and dealt with whatever came after. Can I come in? He said. Ethan looked like he hadn't expected to be asked. Yeah, of course. Mason came in. He pulled the chair from the corner and sat it close to the bed and sat in it the way he sat, squared up, forward, present. He looked at Ethan's hand. How's the feeling coming back? He asked. Hurts, Ethan said. That's good. That's what they tell me. The hurt means it's working. Mason leaned forward. I want to say something to you. I need you to let me finish before you say anything. Ethan nodded. My daughter is alive, Mason said, because of what you did. I don't have a way to tell you what that means to me that would actually be large enough. You could ask me for anything right now, and I'd find a way to make it happen, and it still wouldn't cover the balance. There isn't a balance. There isn't a number. He paused. Let that sit. What I want you to know is that I see you. Not the jacket, not the gup, not the boots. He looked directly at Ethan's face. I see what kind of man you are, and I want you to know that someone sees it, because I have a feeling not enough people have told you that. Ethan held his gaze. His jaw moved slightly. Whatever he was feeling, it was too large and too complicated to organize into words in real time. Thank you, he said finally. It was barely adequate, and they both knew it, and it was also exactly right. Your hospital bill is handled, Mason said. Ethan stiffened. You don't have to. I know I don't. Mason kept his voice level. I want to. There's a difference. Don't take that away from me. Ethan considered that framing. The distinction between obligation and choice. He understood it from the other direction, the way he'd gone out into that storm, not because he had to, but because something in him wouldn't let him not. He nodded. Okay, he said. Your family's number, Mason said. I want to call your parents tonight, to tell them you're all right myself. Ethan blinked. You don't need to do. I know I don't need to, Mason said. What I said before applies. Ethan gave him the number. Mason stored it. He stood. He looked down at this 20-year-old boy who had gone into a mountain blizzard in a canvas work jacket and 50 feet of rope because somebody had to go, and he thought about all the things he wanted to say that would take time and circumstance he didn't have right now. "Get some sleep," he said. "We're going to talk more when you're not half frozen." "Okay," Ethan said. Mason turned to go. Then Ethan said, "Mr. Grayson?" He turned back. "She's going to tell you about the colleges," Ethan said, "when she's ready. I wanted you to know that she's thinking about you when she thinks about it. That's why she hasn't said anything yet. She's not avoiding it because she doesn't trust you. She's avoiding it because she loves you." Mason stood in the doorway for a moment. "She told you about that," he said. "Yeah." "On the mountain?" "Yeah." Mason was quiet. Something moved through his face that was too specific and private to name. "I know," he said. "I've known about the applications for a while." Ethan looked at him. And she should go," Mason said. "Wherever she wants, she should go and not look back." He held Ethan's eyes. "That's what you do for the people you love. You make sure the thing that's right for them doesn't cost them more than it should." He left before Ethan could respond. In the hallway, he found Cal waiting with 2 cups of terrible vending machine coffee. Cal handed him one without comment. They stood there for a moment, the two of them, in the particular silence of men who had been through enough together that they didn't need to fill every space. "He's something," Cal said finally. "Yeah," Mason said. "Going to be interesting." "Yeah." Cal sipped his coffee. "What are you going to do?" Mason thought about 43 rocky acres on a Virginia hillside, a water pump that needed replacing, an old barn, a family running on character and not much else, a 20-year-old who carried things without showing the weight of them. "The right thing," Mason said. Cal nodded. He didn't ask what that meant. He knew Mason well enough to know that when he said the right thing in that particular tone, he already had a plan, and the plan was already in motion in his head, and all it was waiting for was the circumstances to catch up. He called Carol Walker at 10:45. She answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been sitting with the phone, which meant she knew something, which meant either the school had called or the news had been running the storm coverage with enough detail. Her voice when she answered was the voice of a woman who had been holding herself together by sheer force of will for hours. "Mrs. Walker," Mason said, "my name is Mason Grayson. My daughter was the student your son found on the mountain tonight." The sound Carol Walker made on the other end of that call was something Mason would carry with him for a long time. It was not one emotion. It was all of them at once, relief and pride, and something that sounded like it had been held very tight for a very long time, finally being allowed to move. "He's okay," she said. "He's truly okay. He's in the hospital, but he's fine. They're keeping him overnight for observation. His left hand was affected by the cold, but it's responding well. He'll be home tomorrow." Mason paused. "Mrs. Walker, I called because I wanted to tell you personally. Your son went into a blizzard alone in his work jacket for a girl he barely knew because he decided somebody had to go. I've met a lot of people in my life. I have never met someone his age or most ages, honestly, who had that kind of clarity about what mattered." The silence on the other end lasted just long enough that he thought maybe the call had dropped. Then Carol Walker said quietly, "He's always been like that. Since he was small, he just sees what needs doing and does it." She paused. "He doesn't think it's special. That's the thing about him. He doesn't understand that what he does isn't what everyone does." "I know," Mason said. "That's what makes it what it is." "Mr. Grayson," her voice steadied, "thank you for calling. Thank you for going up that mountain." "He went first," Mason said. "We just followed." He hung up and stood in the hallway of the small regional hospital, the vending machine coffee going cold in his hand, and he thought about Carol Walker's voice and about what she'd said. He just sees what needs doing and does it, and he thought about his own daughter asleep 2 doors away, and about 43 rocky acres, and about all the things that were going to need to happen in the coming weeks. He finished the coffee. He crushed the cup. He went back to the waiting area and sat down next to Cal and said, "I need to take a ride to the Walker farm." Cal looked at him. "When, Tom?" "Soon as the boy's home and on his feet." "What are you going to do there?" "Look at what needs doing," Mason said, "and do it." The next morning arrived gray and cold and clear, the storm completely blown through the mountain roads passable again. The school arranged transport for the students, most of whom left the ranger station with the slightly shell-shocked energy of people who had been close to something real and weren't sure yet how to incorporate it. Mrs. Calloway personally signed off on the paperwork that acknowledged Ethan Walker had been present, had performed critical services, and was entitled to his full compensation, plus an additional payment the school board would approve before the week was out. She did this without being asked. Some things you do because they're right, and the paperwork is just the formal version of knowing it. Lily was discharged at 9 in the morning. She came out of her room dressed in clothes Mason had sent Cal back to the motel to retrieve her, color fully restored, moving with the deliberate care of someone whose body was still communicating its recent grievances, but who was not about to let that slow her down. She found Ethan in the hallway standing at the nurse's station while they processed his discharge paperwork, looking like a man who wanted to be somewhere else and was being patient about not being there yet. She walked up beside him and didn't say anything right away. He looked at her. She looked at him. The particular silence between two people who had shared something too large for easy language settled around them like weather. "How's the hand?" she said. "Annoying," he said. "Good annoying or bad annoying?" "Alive annoying." He looked at his left hand, flexing the fingers, slowly watching them move with the proprietary attention of someone who'd spent the night wondering if they were going to do that. "I'll take it." She nodded. "My dad called your mom last night." Something shifted in his face. "Yeah," she cried, Lily said. He looked away, jaw tight. He was not, she had noticed, a person who was comfortable receiving things he was built for, giving them, for carrying them, for being the one who went into the storm. The idea of his mother crying of his parents sitting with the knowledge of what he'd done and what it had cost him clearly hit him somewhere that the cold itself hadn't reached. "She's okay, though," he said. "She sounded good," Lily said. "According to my dad." She paused. He stayed on the phone with her for a while. Ethan turned back to her. "How long is a while?" "Long enough that Cal teased him about it." The corner of her mouth moved. "For what it's worth, my dad doesn't usually make calls like that. He's not a phone person." Ethan absorbed that. He understood what it meant, and he understood why she was telling him, and he felt it land somewhere specific. "What happens now?" he said. It was a genuine question, not rhetorical. He was 20 years old and had spent the night in a hospital after walking into a mountain blizzard and saving someone's life. And he was asking what came next with the honest uncertainty of a person who was good at emergencies and still learning what normal looked like afterward. Lily thought about the question seriously the way she thought about everything. "You go home," she said. "You fix the water pump. You take care of your parents." She paused. "And then I think you let some things happen." "What things?" "My dad's going to want to come to the farm," she said. "He's going to say it's about the pump or about the barn or about whatever he can see needs doing. And it is actually, he genuinely can't drive past a broken thing without wanting to fix it. It's been a problem my whole life." She looked at him directly. "But it's really about this, about what you did. He needs to do something with it. He can't just say thank you and leave it because that's not who he is. So you should be ready for that." Ethan studied her. "Are you telling me to let him help?" "I'm telling you that my dad doesn't offer help as charity," she said. "He offers it as respect. And I think you know the difference because you're the kind of person who knows the difference." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I do know the difference." "Then let him," she said simply. The discharge paperwork came through. A nurse handed Ethan a folder with instructions about the hand and what to watch for and when to call. He thanked her the way he thanked everyone directly without performance, like he actually meant it, which he did. They walked out into the morning together, and Mason and Cal were waiting with the truck, and the world outside was white and quiet and cold, in the specific way that comes after a storm has done everything it intended to do. Mason looked at Ethan in the morning light. Daytime sober, no crisis running, just a man looking at a boy and doing the full accounting. He did that thing Lily had described, that reading the engine thing, the looking underneath the surface. Whatever he found, it confirmed something he had already decided. "Ride with us," Mason said. "We'll take you back to your car at the lodge." "I appreciate it," Ethan said. They rode down the mountain, the four of them in the two trucks, the roads clear. Now the sky a hard winter blue. Ethan sat in the back with Lily, and they talked about nothing in particular, about the terrible vending machine coffee, about whether the nurse who'd processed Ethan's discharge had seemed annoyed or just tired about the way the mountain looked different from below when you'd been on top of it. It was easy. That was the strange thing. After everything, the storm and the cold and the hospital and the weight of all that had passed between them, talking to each other was just easy. It had been easy from the first morning at the breakfast table, and it was still easy now. And neither of them said anything about that, but they both noticed it. Cal noticed it too. He said nothing, but he cut his eyes to Mason once briefly in the front seat. Mason kept his eyes on the road. The lodge parking lot still had Ethan's truck in it, a '99 Ford that had seen better decades, sitting under a fresh layer of snow, with the patient reliability of something that had learned not to expect good conditions. Ethan looked at it with the particular affection people develop for old things that keep showing up. He got out of the truck. He turned to say goodbye and found that Mason had gotten out too and was standing in the cold with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the Ford the way he looked at most things, with the involuntary professional assessment of a man who spent his life understanding how machines worked. "When's the last time that transmission was serviced?" Mason said. Ethan looked at the truck. Honestly, it's on the list." Mason nodded slowly. "The list." "It's a long list," Ethan said. Mason pulled his card from his jacket pocket and held it out. It was a simple card, the garage name, a phone number, Mason's name without any title because he didn't go in for titles. Ethan took it. "When you're ready," Mason said, "call that number, not as a favor, as a transaction. Your truck needs work. We do good work. You'll pay what you can, when you can, and the rest is a long-term arrangement." Ethan looked at the card. He looked at Mason. "You don't know me," he said. It wasn't accusatory, it was honest. "I know enough," Mason said. "I told you that last night. I see what kind of man you are." Ethan turned the card over in his fingers. He thought about his father saying, "Son, you don't have to do this," both of them knowing it wasn't true. He thought about the bank meeting and the 6 months he'd negotiated. He thought about what Lily had said, that Mason's help wasn't charity, it was respect, and that he was the kind of person who knew the difference. He pocketed the card. "Thank you," he said. Mason put his hand out again. The same handshake as the night before, firm, held a beat longer than strictly necessary, the other hand at his shoulder. The gesture of a man who expressed things through contact because words were always going to be inadequate. "Drive safe," Mason said. "Road's good, but watch the bridges." "Yes, sir." Ethan turned to Lily. She was standing 3 feet away, arms crossed against the cold, watching him with that direct look she had, the one that had startled him that first morning at breakfast, because he wasn't used to being actually looked at. "You have my number," she said. It was not a question. "From the hospital intake form," he said. "They put down emergency contacts." "Use it," she said. Not like an obligation, just..." She stopped. "I'm not good at keeping in touch with people. I never have been. But I want to be with you." He held her gaze. "Okay," he said. She nodded, took a breath. "Take care of that hand." "Take care of yourself," he said. "Tell your dad you applied to those schools." Something flickered in her face. "I know. I mean soon." "I know, Ethan." "He already knows, by the way," Ethan said. "He told me last night." Her mouth opened, closed. Something that was partly embarrassment and partly enormous relief moved through her all at once. "He said you should go and not look back." He kept his voice even. His exact words. She stood there for a moment with that, just standing with it, letting it be what it was. Her father knowing. Her father already having gotten to the place she'd been so afraid to bring him to. The particular vertigo of finding out that the conversation you've been dreading was already had without you, and it went the way you needed it to go. Her eyes were bright. She blinked it back. "Of course he does," she said quietly. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Of course he does." She looked at him one more time, the full look, the real one, the one she didn't give to people who hadn't earned it. Then she walked back to the truck and got in. Ethan stood in the cold parking lot and watched the trucks pull out. Mason's hand came out the window once briefly, a gesture that managed to be both casual and significant. Ethan lifted his own hand in return. He stood there until the taillights disappeared around the curve of the access road. Then he got into his truck. It started on the first try, which it didn't always do in cold weather, and he sat there for a moment with the engine running and the heat starting at its slow work on the cab, and the morning all around him, doing what morning does after a long night, just being there quiet and indifferent, not asking anything. He thought about Lily's face when he told her about the colleges. He thought about Mason's handshake. He thought about his mother's voice as he imagined it, the way Carol Walker sounded when she was relieved but hadn't let herself completely release it yet, that particular catch in her breath he'd been hearing since he was a child. He was going home. He had a card in his pocket and a phone number in his recent calls, and a hand that hurt in the specific way that meant it was healing, and he was 20 years old, and something had happened to him on that mountain that he was going to spend a long time understanding. He put the truck in gear. The road home ran east through farmland still buried in white, past places he'd driven 1,000 times. He knew every curve of it. He knew where the road dipped and where it rose, and where the frost heaves made you slow down in December, whether you wanted to or not. He drove it like someone who knew where he was going. Behind him, the mountain stood in the clear winter morning, white and silent and unchanged, the way mountains always are, indifferent to what they witnessed, keeping nothing, letting everything just happen on their slopes and then letting it go. But the people who had been on it, they were carrying it, every one of them. And what they were carrying was going to change things in ways some of them expected, in ways none of them could quite yet see. Ethan pressed the gas and drove toward home. Ethan pulled into the Walker farm at noon. He knew before he even got out of the truck that his mother had been watching the driveway. The front door opened before he had the engine off, and Carol Walker came across the porch and down the steps with the focused energy of a woman who had been holding herself at a controlled distance from panic for approximately 18 hours and was done holding it. She reached him at the driver's side door. She didn't say anything. She just put her arms around him, standing there in the cold with no coat on, and held on with the particular grip of a mother who has spent a night calculating odds and has just received confirmation that the odds came out right. Ethan let her hold on. He was not generally someone who accepted being held. He was the one who held things together. He'd been the one who held things together for 2 years running, and he'd gotten good at it, and it had cost him the ability to receive comfort gracefully. But he stood there in the cold gravel of the driveway and let his mother hold on for as long as she needed, and he thought about Mason Grayson saying, "I know I don't need to," and he applied the same principle to himself. Let it happen. There's a difference between needing and wanting, and the wanting deserves something too. "You're cold," she said into his jacket. "I'm fine." "You were hypothermic last night, Ethan." "I'm fine now." She pulled back and looked at his face with the specific scrutiny of a woman who had been reading him since before he had language. She looked at his left hand, at the slight stiffness in how he held it. She looked at the canvas jacket, which was worse for what it had been through. "Come inside," she said. His father was in the kitchen. Daniel Walker had gotten himself out of bed and into the kitchen chair, which on a bad back day cost him something real, and he was sitting at the table with his coffee, going cold in front of him, and the particular expression of a man who had been awake most of the night and was not going to say so. He looked at his son when Ethan came through the door. He didn't get up. He couldn't today, and they both knew it, and neither of them made anything of it. "Sit down," Daniel said. Ethan sat across from him. They looked at each other. The Walker men communicated this way, not with speeches, not with demonstrations, but with the direct-held look of two people who understood each other well enough that words were often redundant. What passed between them in those 10 seconds was a complete conversation beginning to end. "I heard what you did. I know what it cost. I'm not going to tell you it was foolish because I know why you did it, and I'd have done the same thing, and we both know that too. I'm proud of you in a way I don't have words for. I'm glad you're home." Ethan heard all of it. "Roy managed fine," Daniel said finally, the most practical sentence available deployed as a vessel for everything else. "Good," Ethan said. "Water pump's still out." "I'll look at it this afternoon." "You'll look at it tomorrow. You went through what you went through last night, and you'll rest today." Daniel picked up his coffee, realized it was cold, put it down. "The man called, Mason Grayson. I know, he told me he was going to. He talked to your mother for a while." Daniel paused. "Then he talked to me." Ethan looked at his father. "What did he say?" "He told me what you did." Daniel's jaw worked briefly. "I said I wasn't surprised." He said he was, and he'd met a lot of people. He turned the coffee cup slowly. "He asked if he could come to the farm, said he wanted to meet us, said he had some things he wanted to talk about." "What did you say?" "I said any man who calls a stranger at 11 at night to tell them their kid is safe is a man I'll sit down with." Daniel looked at his son steadily. What is he, Ethan? What's the story there? Ethan thought about how to answer that. He thought about Mason coming through the ranger station door with grease on his hands and snow on his jacket and the room changing when he walked in. He thought about the handshake. He thought about the card in his pocket. He's a man who loves his daughter, Ethan said. Everything else is just surface. Daniel considered that. He nodded once, the slow nod of a man who was revising a preliminary judgment based on better information. He's coming Saturday, he said. I told him Saturday was fine. Ethan nodded. You're not going to tell me to say no, Carol asked from the counter where she'd been making coffee and listening. Why would I say no? She brought the fresh coffee to the table and set it in front of Daniel. Some people might feel I don't know, like accepting help was, Mom, Ethan said, he's not coming to help us. He's coming because he needs to. He picked up his father's old cup and replaced it with the fresh one. There's a difference. Carol looked at her son. She had that look again, the one from the driveway, the reading everything look. Whatever she found, it made her quiet in a particular way, the quiet of a parent watching their child be more than they expected. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Saturday arrived with the particular quality of December weather that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Not cold enough for snow, not warm enough for mud to thaw, just gray and still, and waiting. Ethan was up at 5, the way he always was, and by the time the sun came up, he'd already done the morning rounds, checked on the cattle, assessed the barn's east wall where the wind had been getting in through a gap he'd been meaning to address for a month, and stood for a while in front of the silent water pump, doing the math on what parts it needed and what parts cost. He was still doing that math when he heard the engines. Not one engine, multiple. He walked around to the front of the house and stopped. There were 7 vehicles coming up the Walker Farm driveway. Mason's truck at the front. Behind it, 2 more trucks. Behind those, a van that had the logo of a plumbing supply company on the side. And behind that, 3 more trucks with bed caps, the kind of caps that said there were things stored carefully underneath them. Ethan stood in the driveway and watched them come. Mason got out first. He was in work clothes, worn jeans, heavy boots, a flannel under a canvas jacket that was significantly heavier than Ethan's and had clearly been chosen deliberately. He looked at Ethan. He looked at the farm, the barn, the east wall, the pump housing the greenhouse structure that had a section of framing that needed attention, the driveway itself where the gravel had thinned in places. He looked at all of it the way he looked at engines. You said Saturday, Ethan said. It is Saturday, Mason said. Ethan counted. You brought 11 people. 13, Mason said. 2 are in the last truck. He came to stand beside Ethan and looked at the east wall of the barn. That gap in the framing. How long has that been there? About a month. What's on the other side of it? Hay storage. Mason nodded. Wind gets in, moisture follows. You'll lose the bales before spring if that's not sealed. He said it the same way he'd said everything, not as judgment, just as fact. The way a mechanic tells you what he sees without making you feel stupid for not seeing it yourself. Cal appeared beside him. Pump's there, around back, Ethan said. I'll start with that. Cal was already moving. Mason turned to Ethan. Where are your parents? Inside. Ethan paused. My dad, his back is bad this week. He can't. I'm not expecting him to work, Mason said. I'd like to meet him. Ethan led him to the door. What happened in the Walker kitchen in the next 15 minutes was one of those things that are small and enormous at the same time. Mason Grayson sat across from Daniel Walker. 2 men who had nothing obvious in common, the leather vest and the worn farm coveralls, the motorcycle club and the 43 acres, and they talked. Not performing, not being careful with each other. Just 2 men who had both spent a long time carrying things that were heavier than they looked, recognizing that quality in each other without needing to name it. Daniel told him about the tractor. Mason didn't say I'm sorry the way people said it when they wanted to move past something uncomfortable. He said, tell me where it happened, and Daniel told him, and Mason nodded like he was filing that information seriously. Mason told him about Lily's mother, about the year she left and what it had required of him to make sure Lily didn't carry the weight of it. Daniel didn't say that's tough. He said, how old was she? And Mason said 4. And Daniel said 4 is young enough that you can build something new on top of it if you're careful. And Mason looked at him and said, that's exactly what I tried to do. Carol brought coffee. She sat at the corner of the table and listened. And once, when there was a pause, she said quietly, thank you for calling us that night. My husband and I, we didn't sleep. but we would have been much worse without that call. Mason looked at her. Your son sat in the snow for 2 hours in a work jacket because he decided my daughter mattered. The least I could do was call. Carol pressed her hand over her mouth briefly, took a breath. He's always been like that, she said. Even as a boy, he sees what needs doing. I know, Mason said. I could tell. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. I want to be straight with you about why we're here today. It's not charity. I want to be clear about that. What your son did is not something I can repay with a water pump. There isn't a currency for it. But I'm a man who works with his hands, and when I see something that needs doing, I need to do it. It's a compulsion I've had my whole life, and I've stopped apologizing for it. He looked at Daniel. What we do today, we do because it needs doing, and because we're capable of doing it, and because your son deserves to come home to a farm that's working right. That's the whole story. Daniel Walker looked at Mason Grayson for a long time. All right, he said, I accept that. Mason nodded. He finished his coffee. He stood. He shook Daniel's hand with the same firmness he'd given Ethan at the hospital, held a beat meant something. Then he went back outside. Ethan was already out there. He'd been helping Cal locate the parts of the pump that needed replacing, which was most of it the whole mechanism having been fighting a losing battle for longer than was strictly wise. The plumbing supply van had turned out to contain not just a new pump, but the full installation kit, and 2 men who did this for a living and moved through the work with the efficiency of deep experience. You knew what it needed before you came, Ethan said to Mason. I asked Cal. Cal asked your neighbor Roy. Roy told him everything. Ethan looked at him. Roy's been talking to your people. Roy called me, Mason said, the morning after I called your parents. Said he'd been watching the farm for 2 years and there were some things that needed doing, and he wanted to know if I was actually going to do something or just make phone calls. Ethan stared at him. Roy's 73 years old and apparently has no patience for the performative version of giving a damn, Mason said with something that was close to a smile. I liked him immediately. Ethan thought about Roy, his retired neighbor who showed up twice a day without being asked and fixed things without announcing it and had been doing it since the tractor accident. Like it was just the obvious response to a neighbor in need. The thought of Roy calling Mason Grayson and essentially demanding accountability was so completely Roy that Ethan had to look away for a moment. He never said anything to me, Ethan said. Of course not, Mason said. He's not doing it for your gratitude. He's doing it because it's what you do. Ethan looked at the farm, the men moving through it, working with the focused efficiency of people who understood that work done right was its own argument. Cal at the pump. 2 others at the barn's east wall already pulling the damaged framing, already measuring for the replacement section. Another man in the greenhouse walking the perimeter, his eyes cataloging. This is too much, Ethan said. Not defensively, just honestly. No, Mason said. It's not enough, but it's what I can do with a Saturday. He glanced at Ethan. You're not going to argue with me about this. I'm not arguing. Good. I just want you to understand I'm going to find a way to... Ethan. Mason turned to face him. Stop. Listen to me. He waited until he had the full attention. There are 2 kinds of people in this world. People who keep score and people who understand that life isn't a ledger. I've spent 30 years trying to be the second kind. I'm not always successful, but I try not. He held Ethan's eyes. You walked into a blizzard for my daughter. I'm fixing your pump and your barn wall. Neither of us owes the other anything anymore. We're just 2 people who did what needed doing. You understand? Ethan understood. Yeah, he said. Good. Mason turned back to the barn. Now that greenhouse framing, you do it yourself or did someone else start it? I started it about 6 months ago. I got the basic structure up, but the secondary support system is wrong. The man from the greenhouse called across the yard. Not dangerously wrong, but inefficient. You are losing about 30% of your thermal retention. Ethan looked at Mason. Who is that? Tommy. He built 3 greenhouses last year alone. He's going to tell you what needs changing, and then he's going to help you do it. Does Tommy always just show up to farms and critique greenhouse engineering? Tommy goes wherever Cal tells him to go, Mason said, and Cal goes wherever I tell him to go. He glanced at Ethan sidelong. I have a competent organization. Ethan almost laughed. It came out anyway, brief and real. Mason's expression didn't change, but something in it did something that was satisfaction quiet and complete. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon. Ethan worked alongside them. He wasn't built to stand and watch, and Mason didn't expect him to. They put him where he was most useful, which was everywhere, because he knew the farm, and they didn't, and the combination of his knowledge and their skill in numbers produced results that would have taken him 3 months to achieve alone. The pump was running by 11. The barn wall was sealed by 1. The greenhouse framing was a 2-day job, Tommy said, but they could do the critical sections today and come back for the rest. They came back for the rest. Nobody announced this. Tommy just said, "Come back," and 2 men said, "Yeah," and Mason nodded, and that was the entirety of the planning process. Ethan noticed this the way decisions were made in this group without performance or hierarchy, just people who trusted each other doing what needed doing. It reminded him of something he couldn't immediately place. Then he realized it reminded him of himself. At noon, Carol brought food out. She'd been cooking since 9 in the morning, which was her language for gratitude, the way she always expressed what she couldn't say. She fed people, she fed them well. She kept feeding them until there was no possible doubt about how she felt. There was a situation on the tailgate of Ethan's truck that involved a degree of food that suggested she'd been planning it since Wednesday. Mason's men ate like men who did physical work without ceremony, without pretense, refueling with the efficiency of people who had more to do. They thanked Carol each individually, and she received every thank you with the warmth of a woman who had spent 2 years feeding only her own small family and had forgotten how much she liked feeding more. Daniel came out in the afternoon. His back was better after a morning of rest, not good, but functional, and he sat on the porch steps and watched the work and talked to whoever came near him. He talked to Cal for 40 minutes. He talked to Tommy about greenhouse structures with a knowledge that surprised Tommy until Daniel explained he'd built the original structure himself 14 years ago. He talked to Roy, who had appeared sometime around 2 without announcement, as Roy tended to do. Ethan watched his father talk to these men and thought about what it had cost him, not just physically the accident and the back and the limitations, but the particular cost of being a man who had always done things himself, who had built something with his own hands and then having to watch his 20-year-old son carry it. He thought about whether his father had ever felt what Ethan had felt in the hospital receiving Mason's help, that complicated resistance, that instinct to say, "I can manage this." He thought his father probably had, every day for 2 years. And he thought about how his father had managed it, had sat in the kitchen and let Ethan carry it, because the alternative was Ethan carrying it alone and also carrying Daniel's pride. And that was too much weight for one person. He thought that was probably the bravest thing his father had done. He went over to the porch steps in the middle of the afternoon. He sat beside his father. They didn't say anything for a moment. "They're good people," Daniel said. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Not what I pictured," Daniel said. "When I heard Hell's Angels, I pictured..." "I know. People are what they do," Daniel said. "That's what you've always said. That's what I taught you." He watched Mason direct 2 men on the barn repair. "He's doing what good people do." "Yeah," Ethan said. "He is." Daniel looked at his son. "You doing okay?" "Really?" Ethan thought about it honestly. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." "Hand? Still annoying. Good annoying or bad annoying?" Ethan looked at his father. "You sound like someone I know." Daniel studied him for a moment. Something moved through his face. Amusement assessment, a question he wasn't going to ask outright because he knew his son well enough to know it would get answered without being asked. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. "Lily Grayson, Dad just texted me. Says the pump is running. Says your greenhouse framing was ambitious but misguided. He means that as a compliment, FYI. He uses that phrase for things he respects." He looked at the text for a moment. He typed back, "Your dad is currently telling 2 grown men how to seal a barn wall, and they're just doing it." Her reply came in 10 seconds. "He has that effect on people. How are you doing?" He thought about how to answer that. He typed, "Better than yesterday, worse than I'll be next week. Somewhere in the middle right now. 3 dots. Then, that's the most honest answer I've ever gotten from anyone. Most people just say fine." He typed, "Most people aren't telling the truth." Her replied, "No, they're not." A pause. "Then I told my dad about the colleges last night." He typed, "How'd it go?" Her reply came slower this time, like she was choosing the words carefully. He cried, "He thought I didn't see it. I saw it. Then he said you should go and not look back," almost exactly what he told you he would say. And then he made me terrible pancakes for breakfast and pretended they were good, and I pretended to believe him. Ethan read that twice. He typed, "That sounds exactly right," her reply. "Yeah, it does." "Then thank you for telling me he already knew. I needed to hear that before I could say it to him." He looked at the text. He looked at the farm, the men working, his father on the steps, his mother coming out of the house with another round of coffee, Roy talking to Cal like they were old friends who just happened to meet. He typed, "You doing okay?" Her reply came immediately this time, better than yesterday. "Worse than I'll be next week." He smiled, actually smiled fully, the kind that arrives without you deciding to. His father on the steps beside him said nothing, but Ethan felt him notice. The afternoon moved on. Around 4 o'clock, with the light going early the way December light did, Mason called to work for the day. The pump was running, the barn was sealed, the critical greenhouse sections were done. Tommy had left a written list of what needed doing in the second session, precise and practical, the kind of list made by someone who respected the person who would be using it. The men packed their tools with the same efficiency they'd unpacked them. Trucks were loaded. The plumbing supply van's crew shook hands with Ethan and told him the pump was under warranty, and if it gave trouble in the first year, to call the number on the paperwork. Ethan shook hands with all of them. He tried to find the right words and mostly found that shaking hands and looking people in the eye was carrying more weight than any sentence he could have constructed. They seemed to understand. Mason was last. He stood in the driveway while his men loaded up, and he looked at the farm in the late afternoon gray with the expression of a man who had done what he came to do and found that it was sufficient but not complete. "We'll come back for the rest of the greenhouse," he said. "You don't, Ethan." "Right," Ethan said. "Okay." Mason looked at him. "There's something else," he said. "I've been thinking about how to say this since the hospital, and I've decided there's no clean way to say it, so I'm just going to say it." Ethan waited. "I want to offer you work," Mason said. "At the garage, not full-time, part-time, your hours, your schedule, the farm comes first. That's not negotiable. The farm has to come first. But you've got hot mechanical instincts. I saw it in how you assessed the pump this morning. You've been teaching yourself the things for 2 years that take other people formal training to learn." He held Ethan's gaze. "The garage is busy. I need people I trust. I don't trust many people. And I trust that quality in people very fast when I see it." So, Ethan stood with it. You don't have to do that," he said. "I know I don't. What did I tell you about the difference between having to and wanting to? You told me to stop taking it away from you." "I did." Mason put his hands in his jacket pockets. "Think about it. No pressure, no obligation, no timeline. But think about it." Ethan thought about $42 a day and a water pump and a bank meeting at 19 and YouTube videos at midnight. He thought about what it meant to be offered something real, not charity, not pity, from someone who had decided he was worth the investment. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all I'm asking." Mason put his hand out. Ethan took it. The handshake lasted a beat longer than before. Something had shifted in it. The first one had been gratitude. The second had been recognition. And this one was something different. Something that was beginning to look like two people deciding they were going to know each other for a long time. Mason left. The farm was quiet. Ethan stood in the driveway and looked at the barn with its sealed wall, and the pump housing with its new mechanism, and the greenhouse with its corrected framing, and he thought that the farm looked the same and completely different, at the same time the way things look when something essential about them has changed, and the change is good. His father appeared in the doorway. He'd been watching the last truck leave. "Well," Daniel said. "Yeah," Ethan said. "He offered you something." It wasn't a question. Ethan looked at his father. "You saw that?" "I read people," Daniel said. "I didn't fall down and hit my head in that accident, son. I just hurt my back." He leaned against the doorframe. "What did he offer?" Ethan told him. Daniel listened. He was quiet for a moment when Ethan finished. "What are you going to do?" he asked. Ethan looked at the farm, at the 43 acres that had been his whole world for 2 years, that he had learned and carried and fought for and loved with the specific love you develop for things that cost you something real. "I don't know yet," he said. "I need to think." "Think fast," Daniel said, "before you talk yourself out of it." Ethan looked at his father. Daniel said, "You've been taking care of this place for 2 years, and you've done it right, and I am proud of you in a way I can't put into words. But son, He stopped, steadied himself. You are 20 years old. You are allowed to want something that's yours. Something beyond this. He looked at the farm, then back at his son. I got hurt. The farm got harder. You stepped up. That's not a debt you owe me forever. It's just something you did because you're who you are. He held his son's eyes. I'm getting better. Slow, but better. Roy's not going anywhere. The farm isn't going anywhere. He paused. You can want more than this, and it doesn't mean you love it less. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Ethan stood there. 2 years of early mornings and YouTube videos and bank meetings and water buckets and held together equipment and meals where he didn't say how close it was, all of it pressing against what his father was saying and what his father was saying pressing back. He understood. Yeah, he said quietly. I understand. Good, Daniel said. He pushed off the door frame. Come inside. Your mother made enough food for approximately 40 people, and there are only 4 of us for dinner. Ethan followed his father inside. Behind him, the farm sat in the December dark, the pump running quiet and steady, the barn wall sealed against whatever weather was coming, the greenhouse ready for what was going to grow. And in Ethan Walker's jacket pocket, a card with a phone number on it was waiting. He called on a Tuesday. Not because Tuesday meant anything in particular, but because he'd spent Sunday and Monday doing what his father had told him to do, thinking fast before he talked himself out of it. And Tuesday morning he woke up at 5, the way he always did the rounds, the way he always did, stood in front of the running water pump for a moment listening to it work, and made the decision the way he made most of his decisions, which was quietly and completely and without drama. He pulled the card from his jacket pocket. He dialed. Mason answered on the second ring, the same way he'd answered the unknown Virginia area code the night everything started present. Immediate no performance of being busy. Walker, he said, not a question. He'd apparently saved the number. I've been thinking about the offer, Ethan said. I know. What did you decide? I want to try it. He paused. Thursdays and Fridays. Maybe Saturday mornings when the farm allows. I can't promise more than that right now, and I won't promise what I can't deliver. I'm not asking for more than that, Mason said. Thursdays and Fridays is fine. Saturday when you can. A brief pause. Can you start this Thursday? Ethan looked at the pump, at the barn, at the 43 acres coming up gray and quiet in the early morning. Yeah, he said, I can start Thursday. Good. Mason's voice carried something that wasn't quite warmth and wasn't quite satisfaction, but was in the neighborhood of both. Cal will walk you through the shop systems. You'll start on basic diagnostic work. We'll see where your skills actually are and go from there. Okay. Ethan, a pause. You made the right call. I'm starting to think so, Ethan said. He hung up. He stood in the cold for another minute. Then he went inside and told his father. Daniel Walker received the news the same way he received most things he'd already expected, with a nod and a coffee cup and the specific expression of a man who is not going to say I told you so because he doesn't need to. Thursdays and Fridays, Daniel repeated, and Saturday when I can manage it. I can manage Thursdays and Fridays, Daniel said. Roy's already said he'll do the morning rounds on those days. He volunteered before you asked. Ethan stared at his father. Roy volunteered before I asked. Roy called Monday morning, said he figured you'd be calling Mason by Tuesday, and he wanted to get ahead of it. Daniel looked at his son over the rim of his cup. That man has been watching out for this family for 2 years, and I think it's time you stopped being surprised by it. Ethan sat down at this kitchen table. He thought about Roy, 73 years old, retired, showing up twice a day because it was the obvious thing to do. He thought about Roy calling Mason Grayson to demand accountability. He thought about a lifetime of people doing the right thing quietly without announcement, and how easy it was to mistake that quietness for absence. I'm going to do something for Roy, Ethan said. He won't want anything. I know, I'm going to do something anyway. He looked at his father. There's a difference between having to and wanting to. Daniel looked at his son for a moment. Then he smiled a real smile, the kind that used his whole face, the kind Ethan hadn't seen much of in 2 years of hard going. You sound like someone, Daniel said. Yeah, Ethan said. I'm starting to figure out who. Thursday arrived the way first days arrive, with more weight than the day itself deserved, carrying the combined pressure of every unknown thing that came with it. Ethan was in the truck by 6:15, dressed in the best work clothes he had, which were clean and functional and not remotely impressive, and he'd made his peace with that before he left the driveway. He pulled into the Grayson garage at 7 sharp. The place was already running. That was the first thing he registered, not visually, but through sound and movement. The garage alive with the particular energy of people who started early because they wanted to, not because they had to. Music from somewhere inside. The sound of an impact wrench. Voices low and purposeful. Cal met him at the door. Cal was a man of few unnecessary words, which Ethan had already established, and he expressed this by handing Ethan a shop apron saying, "Follow me," and walking directly to the first bay without waiting to see if Ethan was keeping up. Ethan kept up. The first day was a diagnostic day. Cal put him on 3 vehicles, a truck with a transmission complaint, a bike with an electrical fault, and an SUV whose owner had described the problem as, "It just feels wrong," which Cal said was actually one of the harder diagnostic categories because feeling wrong could mean 50 different things. Cal watched him work, not hovering, just present the way experienced people observe someone new reading competence through method rather than result. By the afternoon, the transmission was diagnosed. The electrical fault was identified. The SUV's "It just feels wrong" had turned out to be a stabilizer bar link that was failing in a way subtle enough that most people would have missed it, and Ethan had found it by working through the system, methodically ruling out the obvious candidates and then sitting with the vehicle for 20 minutes doing nothing except listening to it move. Cal had watched that last part with particular attention. When the day ended, he walked Ethan to his truck. He stood there for a moment in the way of a man organizing a verdict. "You taught yourself most of this," Cal said. "Yeah. YouTube and trial and error. Mostly, yeah. You have got good instincts. The stabilizer bar, that was patient work. Most guys your age want to find it fast. You slowed down when the obvious wasn't working." Ethan shrugged. "On the farm, if you fix the wrong thing, you've wasted money you don't have. I learned to slow down." Cal nodded. "That'll serve you here." He turned toward the garage. "See you Friday." "See you Friday," Ethan said. He drove home with the heat up and the radio off and the particular feeling of a day that had gone well in ways that were hard to quantify but easy to feel. Not triumph exactly, just rightness. The feeling of a person who has put themselves in the correct place and let the day confirm it. He texted Lily when he got home. First day done, he typed. Her reply came in 3 minutes, and he typed, Cal said, "I slow down when the obvious isn't working." I think that was a compliment. Her reply from Cal, that's a standing ovation. He told a guy last month he had acceptable instincts, and the guy nearly cried from happiness. Ethan looked at that. He typed, "How are you doing?" Her reply came slower. He'd learned in the weeks since the mountain that the speed of her replies was a reliable indicator. Fast meant she was okay. Slow meant she was processing something real. Honestly, she typed, "Scared. I got the acceptance package from Dartmouth. Full scholarship. It's real now. It's not an application anymore. It's a plane ticket and a dorm room and everything changing." He read that twice. He typed, "Tell me what scared feels like." Specifically. A longer pause. Then, like standing at the edge of something I've wanted for a long time and suddenly realizing that getting the thing means leaving everything else. My dad. The garage. Roy. I know that sounds weird, but Roy is part of my life too. I've known him since I was 12. "Everything I know," he typed. "Can I tell you something?" She typed, "Yes." He wrote, "I've been leaving the farm twice a week for a month. Every Thursday and Friday morning, I drive away from the only thing I've known for 2 years, and every Thursday and Friday evening, I drive back and the farm is still there. My dad is still there. Roy is still there. Leaving something doesn't mean losing it. It just means trusting that what you built is solid enough to stay while you're gone." He sent it. He sat there looking at it. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then I'm going to screenshot that and read it about 40 times. He typed, "Don't screenshot it. Just remember it." Her reply, "That's the most Ethan Walker thing you've ever said to me." He almost laughed. He typed, "Is that good or bad?" Her reply was immediate this time. "It's exactly right." The weeks moved. December became January, became February. And the farm ran with the steady rhythm that it had found now Ethan present 5 days a week gone too. Roy filling the gap without drama. Daniel getting incrementally better with the physical therapy he'd finally committed to the water pump running clean and reliable under the new mechanism. And the garage. The garage was the thing Ethan hadn't fully anticipated. He'd expected to learn skills. He was learning skills, real ones, formal ones, the kind with names and methodologies that filled in the gaps of what he'd been patching together on his own for 2 years. Cal was a rigorous teacher, not unkind, but not soft, the kind who expected you to remember what you were shown once and build on it the second time. Ethan was exactly the kind of student Cal's method worked on. He absorbed things, filed them correctly, and applied them without needing the instructions repeated. But the skills weren't the thing. The thing was the people. 13 men worked regularly at the Grayson garage. Most of them had been there for years. They had the particular social cohesion of people who had chosen each other, which was different from the cohesion of people who had been assigned to the same place by circumstance. They argued loudly and frequently about small things and closed ranks completely over anything that mattered. They knew each other's families, their histories, the things that had gone hard and the things that had gone right. They accepted Ethan the way water accepts a stone, not by ceremony, but by the stone simply being there long enough that the water started moving around it naturally. It happened in small increments. Tommy stopping by his bay to tell him a better technique for the thing he was working on unprompted, with the generosity of someone who simply liked passing knowledge along. Donnie bringing him coffee on the Friday mornings without asking because he'd noticed Ethan's cup was empty and he was walking past. Cal saying in front of 3 other men that Walker's diagnostic method was something the newer guys should watch, and then never mentioning he had said it. None of it was announced. All of it accumulated. There was a morning in February, a Thursday dark, early cold in the way. February was cold, that specific gray and relentless cold that was different from December's dramatic cold, because it was patient when Ethan was working on a vintage Harley that a club member had brought in for restoration, and Mason came to stand at the edge of the bay and watch. He didn't say anything right away. He watched Ethan's hands the way he worked through the engine, and his face did that reading the engine thing, and what he was reading was not the Harley. "You know what the guys call you," Mason said. Ethan looked up. "What, the farm?" Mason said it without inflection, just delivered the fact. "They call you the farm, like go ask the farm will know, the farm already checked it." Ethan sat back on his heels. It's a good thing," Mason said. "In this garage, you get a name when people trust you. The name is the trust." He paused. "It took Cal 3 years to get a name. It took Donnie 1 year. You got one in 6 weeks." Ethan looked at his hands, at the engine, and at the bay he'd been working in for 6 weeks that had started to feel like a place that was partly his. "I don't know what to do with that," he said honestly. "You don't have to do anything with it," Mason said. "You just keep being what you are, and it takes care of itself." He left the bay. Ethan watched him go and thought that was probably the closest thing to a speech Mason Grayson ever made, and it was more than enough. He went back to the Harley. March brought the first real warmth, the kind that arrived tentative and then committed, and with it came the thing everyone who'd been watching the Walker situation had been quietly waiting for. The greenhouse started producing. Not wildly, not miraculously, but steadily, consistently. The corrected framing doing what Tommy had said it would do. The thermal retention improved enough that the early spring vegetables came in 2 weeks ahead of what they'd managed the previous year. Small difference in agricultural terms, significant difference in terms of the farmers market in town, where Carol Walker had a standing table that she'd been running at reduced capacity for a year. Full capacity hit on the first Saturday in March. Carol came home that afternoon with empty crates and a look on her face that Ethan hadn't seen in 2 years, the specific look of a woman whose work has produced what she intended it to produce, full and uncomplicated and a little fierce. "We sold out," she said. Ethan looked up from the truck he was working on in the driveway. "Everything. Everything. I could have sold twice as much." She set the crates down. "Mrs. Peterson from the next table asked if we were going to have more next week. I told her yes." "Can we?" "Yes," Carol said with a certainty that settled the question. Ethan looked at her. He looked at the greenhouse. He thought about Tommy's list and the corrected framing and 13 men who had come to a farm on a Saturday because it needed doing. "We need to expand the second section," he said. "I know," Carol said. "I can do it." "I know," she said again. She put her hand on his arm, briefly, just the contact, the same gesture she'd used since he was small, when she wanted to say something she didn't have words for. Then she went inside. Ethan stood in the driveway. He pulled out his phone. He called Lily. She answered on the third ring, slightly breathless, with the particular energy of someone caught mid-task. She was studying, she said, for a chemistry exam, which she was going to be fine on. She just needed to stop thinking about it constantly. Tell me something that isn't chemistry, she said. My mother sold out at the farmer's market, he said. He heard her stop moving. Everything. Everything. She could have sold twice as much. A pause. Then the sound she made was not a word, but it was completely expressive, that sound of something you've been hoping for arriving exactly when you needed to hear it. Ethan, she said. Yeah, that's everything, she said. You know that, right? That's 2 years of you holding that thing together, and that's everything. He looked at the greenhouse, at the barn with its sealed wall, at the pump housing the gravel in the driveway where Mason's trucks had pulled in and pulled out and left things different than they found them. Yeah, he said. I know. How's your hand? Good, he said. Back to normal. Good annoying or bad annoying? Just normal, he said. No annoying anymore. That's, she laughed softly. That's genuinely great news. I've been worried about your hand for 3 months. You've had other things to worry about. I can worry about multiple things, she said. I'm a very efficient worrier. He smiled. He'd been doing that more, smiling at his phone, at her texts, at the things she said that were precise and dry and exactly right. He'd been doing it often enough that his mother had stopped pretending not to notice, and his father had started making very deliberate eye contact with the ceiling whenever Ethan checked his phone. When do you leave? He asked. The question landed with the weight it always carried. She was quiet for a moment. August, she said. August 23rd. That's 6 months. 5 months and 22 days, she said. But who's counting? You're, he said. Both things, she said. I'm both counting and trying not to count, which is a deeply uncomfortable way to exist. He thought about what he'd texted her the first night, leaving. Something doesn't mean losing it. It just means trusting what you built is solid enough to stay while you're gone. He thought about whether he needed to say it again and decided it was one of those things that only needed saying once. You're going to be fine, he said instead. I know, she said. That's almost the scariest part. I know I'm going to be fine, and I'm scared anyway. That's what brave is, he said. Not being sure and going anyway. Silence for a moment. Did you just quote yourself? I didn't quote myself. That's basically what you said to me in the snow. It's the same idea, he said. It still applies. She laughed again, real and warm, the same laugh she'd given him on the mountain that he'd held like something valuable. You're annoyingly consistent on, she said. I've been told. By who? Cal, he said. My dad, Roy, multiple members of a motorcycle club. He paused. You. All credible sources, she said. They talked for another 40 minutes about her chemistry exam and his Harley restoration and the farmer's market and the greenhouse expansion and the particular dynamic of a garage full of men who had decided to call him the farm and what that meant to him and why. She listened the way she always listened, actually receiving it, and he talked the way he only talked to her, the whole thing, not the managed version. When they hung up, the evening had come in fully around him, and the farm was quiet and the pump was running its steady background note, and the greenhouse was doing in the dark what it was built to do, and Ethan Walker stood in the middle of 43 acres that he knew by feel and thought about 5 months and 22 days. He thought about a girl who had gone up a side trail to be alone, because being in a crowd of people who decided what you were was lonelier than actually being alone. He thought about the pine tree and the thermal blanket and talking about fathers and pancakes and college applications in the middle of a blizzard, because those were the things that mattered, the real things, and the storm had stripped away everything that wasn't real. He thought about what came next. What came next was April, which brought Mason to the farm for the greenhouse expansion. Not with 13 men this time, but with 4. Because the boy was more precise, and Mason had learned how Ethan worked well enough to calibrate accordingly. They spent 2 Saturdays on it, working alongside each other in the specific way of 2 people who had discovered they had compatible rhythms. Mason's directing function and Ethan's knowing the farm function, producing something better than either one alone. On the 2nd Saturday, near the end of the day, Mason said something he'd been working toward for a while. There's a guy who wants to bring his full fleet of vehicles to the garage, he said. 17 trucks. Commercial agricultural equipment. He's been working with a shop in Richmond, but they've been inconsistent. He didn't look at Ethan while he said it, keeping his hands on the framing section they were aligning. The reason I'm telling you this is that commercial agricultural equipment is a specific category. It's not the same as a truck or a bike. It needs someone who understands how those machines actually get used. Ethan held the framing steady. Someone who grew up on a farm. For example, Mason said, you want me to take the account. I want you to consider it. It would mean more hours. It would mean eventually different hours, not the same Thursdays and Fridays arrangement indefinitely. He paused. But not yet. The account doesn't start until fall. By fall, things may be different on this end. He looked at the greenhouse. Different in good ways. Ethan thought about August 23rd, about the ways fall was going to be different in general. I'll consider it, he said. That's all I'm asking, Mason said. The same words he'd used in December when he handed over the card. The same weight behind them. They finished the greenhouse section. It was solid and right and built to last the combination of Tommy's specifications and Ethan's knowledge of the farm's specific needs, producing something that neither one of them would have managed as well alone. They stood back and looked at it with the satisfaction of people who have made something correct. It's going to produce well, Mason said. Yeah, Ethan said, it is. What came next was May, and with May came the thing that Ethan had not seen coming and probably should have because it had been building all along and he had just been too close to it to see the shape. Tyler Marsh showed up at the farm. Not Mason, not Cal, not Roy. Tyler Marsh, the boy from the bus, the one who had said the manure thing, the one who had stood in the ranger station afterward and said, I said something stupid, and you probably don't remember me, but I need you to know I know that. He drove up in a car that was worth more than the Walker Farm's monthly operating costs, and he got out in clothes that were similarly priced, and he stood at the end of the driveway looking slightly like a man who has rehearsed what he's going to say and has arrived at the location of the rehearsal. Ethan came out of the barn. They looked at each other. Tyler Marsh, Ethan said, not cold, not warm, just stating the fact. Yeah, Tyler said. Hi. He looked at the farm, back at Ethan. I know this is weird. It's a little weird, Ethan agreed. I've been thinking since December. About the bus, about the ranger station, about what you did. Tyler's jaw worked in the way of someone pushing through the prepared version toward the real version. My dad and I had a conversation after. He asked me why I said what I said on the bus, and I told him I didn't know, and he said that was the right answer because I didn't know. And he said not knowing is only acceptable when you're on your way to knowing. He stopped. I'm trying to get to knowing. Ethan studied him. He thought about what Mason had said about people who kept score versus people who understood life wasn't a ledger. He thought about what his father had said, people are what they do. What do you want? Ethan said. Tyler looked at the barn, at the greenhouse, at the farm in general. I want to understand what I've been looking past, he said. I'm going to school for business. I've been talking to Lily, actually. She told me about the farmer's market, about the greenhouse. She said the production is scaling. He stopped again. I think there might be something here worth looking at. From a business perspective, the supply side of local agricultural production for $10, Ethan said. Tyler stopped. Are you here to help or to learn? Ethan said. Because those are different things, and I want to know which one you think you're doing. Tyler stood with that question. He gave it the time it deserved, which surprised Ethan because the Tyler Marsh on the bus would not have given it that time. Both, Tyler said finally. I think, can it be both? Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Roy, he called toward the house. Roy appeared in the doorway with his coffee the way Roy always appeared already. They're already attentive, already a step ahead. This is Tyler Marsh, Ethan said. He wants to understand what he's been looking past, show him the east section of the greenhouse, and explain the production cycle. Roy looked at Tyler with the particular gaze of a 73-year-old man who had no patience for performance and infinite patience for sincerity. You willing to get your hands in it? Roy said to Tyler. Tyler looked at his clothes, looked at the greenhouse, made a decision. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I am. Roy nodded once. He gestured. Tyler followed. Ethan watched them go and thought that some things corrected themselves if you gave them enough time and enough room and didn't close the door when someone knocked on it honestly. August 23rd was a Saturday. Ethan took the day off from the garage. Mason told him on Thursday not to come in, just set it as a fact, no discussion. And he drove the 2 hours to the Grayson house, which he'd been to 4 times now, enough times that he knew the driveway and the way the garage light came on automatically, and the fact that Mason always had coffee running by 6 in the morning, regardless of what time anyone arrived. Lily was on the porch when he pulled up. She had 2 bags at her feet, not much for a girl who was moving her whole life, and she was sitting in the porch chair with a cup of coffee that she wasn't drinking, just holding. He got out of the truck. She looked at him, he looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment because there wasn't a sentence that was going to be adequate, and they'd both known each other long enough to know that reaching for the inadequate sentence was worse than the silence. He sat on the porch step below her chair. "You ready?" he said. "No," she said. "Good," he said. She looked at him. "Good. You shouldn't be fully ready," he said. "Fully ready means you have already stopped caring about what you're leaving." "You haven't. That's not a problem, Lily. That's just what it is." She was quiet for a moment. "My dad made pancakes this morning." "How were they?" "Terrible," she said. Her voice caught on the last syllable barely. She pressed it down. "I told him they were great." "What did he say?" "He said I was a bad liar." She looked at her hands, and then he hugged me for about 5 minutes. Ethan sat with them. Mason came through the front door. He was carrying Lily's bags, which he picked up from the porch without asking. He looked at Ethan. He looked at his daughter. He had the face of a man who had made all his peace with something and was still making it simultaneously, because that's how peace actually worked with the things that mattered most. "Flight's at noon," Mason said. "We should move." Lily stood. She looked at the house, the porch, the door, the garage off to the side, the whole geography of everything she'd been built by. She looked at it the way Ethan had watched his father look at the farm on the porch steps at dusk, memorizing, but not like someone who was afraid. Like someone who was confident it would still be here when they came back. She looked at Ethan. "You'll call," she said. "You'll call," he said. "Both," she said. "Both," he agreed. She stepped off the porch. She walked to her father's truck. She got in without looking back, because looking back was the one thing you couldn't do in a moment like this. Not because you didn't care, but because you cared too much. And if you looked back, you might not be able to close the door. Mason stood by the truck. He looked at Ethan one more time with that reading the engine look. "You're going to take the agricultural account," Mason said. Not a question. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I think I am." Mason nodded. He put out his hand. Ethan took it. This handshake was different from all the others, not because anything in the gesture had changed, but because of what had accumulated between them. December to August, a mountain and a hospital, and a farm and a garage, and 600 miles of early mornings and late evenings, and the particular thing that builds between two people when they have repeatedly shown each other who they are and found it sufficient. It was the handshake of two men who knew each other. "Take care of the farm," Mason said. "Take care of yourself," Ethan said. Mason got in the truck. The engine turned over, that particular sound reliable and certain that Ethan could now identify by make and year just from listening. He watched the truck back out and pull away and disappear around the bend in the road. He stood in the empty driveway for a moment. Then he got in his own truck. He drove home with the windows cracked, even though August was still warm, because he liked the air moving through, and he liked the way the Virginia farmland looked in late summer, all that green, going golden at the edges, everything in the last full weight of what it had grown into before the turn. He was 20 years old. He had 43 acres and a running pump and a sealed barn wall and a greenhouse producing ahead of schedule. He had Thursdays and Fridays in a garage where people called him the farm and meant it as the highest thing they could say. He had a father getting stronger and a mother with empty crates at the end of every Saturday, and a neighbor who called motorcycle club presidents to demand accountability on behalf of people he loved. He had a card in his jacket pocket that he didn't need anymore because the number was in his phone and the name was in his life. He had a girl at an airport somewhere behind him who was scared and brave and going anyway, and who was going to call and who he was going to call and who understood, without it needing to be said, that leaving something solid doesn't mean losing it. It means trusting what got built. He pulled into the Walker farm driveway at 3 in the afternoon. Roy's truck is there. His father was on the porch steps. His mother was in the greenhouse. The pump was running its steady note. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. Ethan Walker got out of his truck, walked up the driveway of the only home he'd ever known, and understood completely in his bones, in his hands, in the hand that had healed, in the chest that had learned to receive as well as give, that the boy everyone had looked past had not become something new. He had simply become fully what he always was. And the world slowly and perfectly, in the way the world manages when pushed in the right direction by the right people, had finally caught up enough to see it. That was enough. That was everything. That was exactly right.